Welcome, tired traveler. I'm your companion for stories tonight, set to help you melt into deep, tranquil sleep. Before we journey, kindly ensure you like the video and subscribe for many more nighttime tales. Inform me below in the comments where you're settling down and what time it now reads. Lastly, if there's an adventure you'd like to hear next, I would truly welcome that suggestion. I never imagined that holding on to rental lodges in the mountains would result in a situation that still denies me slumber at midnight. Folks assume managing holiday cottages is effortless income. Just post it, tidy it, disregard it. That might prove correct for some individuals, but not me. Not because of what unfolded that winter. Before every detail spun into disaster, operations were straightforward. I lived downtown in Denver, yet possessed 2 minor vacation cabins in a small settlement just beyond Netherland, Colorado. Peaceful village, dense timberland, genuinely picturesque material. The kind of location city inhabitants reserve when aiming to reconnect with wilderness, inhale the crisp air, pretend they're characters within some holiday special film. My properties weren't elaborate, just older wooden buildings nestled near the border of Roosevelt National Forest. One of those, the Aspen Gulch Lodge, is where this account unfolds. A single-level, dual-bedroom construction featuring a porch wrapping around in glass panes that look out onto kilometers of only trees. Most of my visitors were respectful. A few wrecked the interior. Several pilfered minor articles like towels or power cables. But nothing ever shook my composure. Never until that 7-day period. A major blizzard had been predicted. One of those Colorado cold season onslaughts where the news reporters speak phrases like, "Remain indoors unless absolutely essential." The tempest was slated to arrive Saturday evening. On Thursday morning, I received a text from the maintenance contractor I typically utilized. "Hey, I'm quite unwell today. Cannot make it to Aspen Gulch before the incoming occupants." Fantastic. The prior guests had recently vacated. A household of 5 people. Families generally produce clutter, and with snow expected shortly, I refused to risk leaving garbage outside or perishables within. Carnivores, rodents, whatever. They would construct a feast out of the mess. Consequently, I decided to heck with it. I'll travel up Friday, clean the dwelling myself, and stay overnight if required. Prior to departing, I messaged my neighboring lodge proprietor, a fellow named Riley. Well, neighbor meaning his structure is roughly a quarter-mile distant through the thicket. I hardly knew him beyond courteous small talk and the occasional, "Do you need anything prior to the snowfall?" He replied, "I'm in Boulder until next week. Cabin is unoccupied. If you pass nearby, would you check if there's a parcel left at the entrance?" Simple request. I gathered supplies, topped off the tank, tossed my worn snow boots onto the rear seat, and drove northward. The journey felt routine initially, dry pavement, minimal traffic flow, until I got closer to Netherland. That high-elevation atmosphere always hits differently, like it slices directly through clothing layers. The firmament was oppressive and gray, like it was retaining its breath before unleashing fury upon the peaks. I arrived at Riley's lodge first. Parking directly ahead of it, something felt misplaced. Not scary movie amiss. Just why does this appear odd? Off. There were indicators in the accumulation, not vehicular tracks. Footprints. Recent ones. A solitary set moving around the perimeter of a structure and vanishing behind the rear. Now look. Highland sectors see hunters, trekkers, peculiar folks utilizing shortcuts. So it wasn't an instant danger sign, but the boot marks didn't look like someone walking their pet or traversing a path to a trail. The strides were slow, deliberate, circling the building as if someone were examining it closely. I checked his porch for deliveries. Nothing. Captured a picture of the print marks and forwarded it to him. He telephoned immediately. "Those are not mine," he declared. "See if any windows appear tampered with." "Pal, I'm not aiming to act like law enforcement out here. Just take a swift look, please." So, I circled to the back of his residence. The prints led straight toward a glass pane. The material wasn't shattered, but I noticed smears like someone pressed near. I walked further and saw they extended behind the structure, then entered the forest edge behind his grounds. Deep woods, no pathways, only wild nature. I informed him. He sighed and said, "As long as the entrance isn't damaged, I'll attend to it upon my return. My gratitude for checking." I drove uphill toward my rented lodge. Right away, I noticed additional prints near my property, too. But these were aged, likely from the tenants who stayed previously. Regardless, I unlocked the access point, stepped inside, and inhaled deeply. The dwelling was a disaster. Soiled tableware, empty carbonated beverage containers, sweet wrappers, mud stains upon the flooring. Households consistently underestimate the amount of turmoil they generate. I activated music and commenced tidying. It consumed nearly 2 hours to organize the kitchen space, dispose of the refuse, clean linens, everything. Around 3 p.m., I took a respite, stepped outdoors onto the deck, and observed the heavens. Snow began to fall, small specks whirling like particles. The atmosphere felt heavier still. In the mountains, you learn to identify when a storm is not playing around. I went back inside, folded covers, disinfected the restroom, vacuumed the main area. Everything proceeded normally until it didn't. Close to 4:30 p.m., with music still running, I detected a noise that penetrated the sound barrier. Crunch. Steps in the snow. Measured. Heavy. I lowered the sound. Another crunch. Another. Someone was traversing the structure's exterior. Not rapidly, not casually, just circling around. My initial assumption was possibly a lost walker, so I peeked out the nearest window. Nothing visible, but the audio was indisputable. Someone was outside maneuvering from one side of the building to the other. My vehicle was parked nearby. Whoever it was knew someone was present. I didn't go outside. I didn't shout. I simply quietly secured the door and watched the window for a duration. After approximately 5 minutes, the footfalls faded into the snow and quiet. My heart did not cease hammering for a whole 30 minutes. By 7 p.m., the snow was descending fiercely. Thick flakes pelting the glass. Visibility was perhaps 4 meters. The world beyond the deck railing was only white turmoil. I prepared something simple to eat, sat at the small dining counter, and attempted to settle my nerves. I assured myself I likely imagined the sounds of footsteps. Snow's descent can reverberate strangely, with snapping, ice chunks falling off roofs. To ground myself, I phoned my sister back in Denver. "Are you certain it was footsteps?" she queried. "You become agitated alone out there." "Yes, thanks for the encouragement. Look, just secure the premises, remain inside, and don't allow your imagination to run rampant. It's truly a whiteout." She wasn't incorrect, but she wasn't physically there either. Following the meal around 8:45 p.m., the residents commenced emitting those noises old wooden structures make in wintertime. Timber popping, support beams settling, roof groaning under the fresh snow load. I convinced myself that was the sole reason. I started a film and stretched out upon the sofa. The gale screamed outside, the wind slamming against the exterior panels. True Colorado white storm. But midway through the movie, I heard a new sound. A faint thud on the external barrier, succeeded by another and another, like someone was knocking frost off their footwear. This instance, I silenced the movie. Quiet, then gentle rubbing against the exterior paneling like material grazing wood. Someone was directly outside. My core lurched. I seized the nearest item I could employ for self-defense, a fireplace tool, and crept along the corridor. Every plank beneath my weight seemed excessively loud. I reached the sleeping area. The window coverings were shut. I thought I perceived a shadow dart right past the glass. Just a slight dark outline. No footsteps this time. No audible sound. Just a presence. Then the silence fractured. A tiny tap upon the glass. Not an impact. Not enough to damage anything. Only a fingertip touching the frozen pane. I froze in that spot. After about 15 seconds, I compelled myself to move forward, grab the drape, and rip it open. There was nobody visible, but there were footprints fresh directly below the window leading toward the backside of the structure. My voice felt dry. I closed the curtain immediately and retreated. I picked up my handset and contemplated contacting the authorities, but I hesitated. What would I convey? There are footfalls outside. They'd assume I'm delusional or intoxicated. So I waited. I sat back on the couch, poker secured, eyes fixed upon the front window. The gale howled louder still, shaking the lodge. Hours dragged on like that. No additional taps, no more footfalls. Close to midnight, exhaustion overwhelmed me like a physical blow. I climbed into bed with the tool beside me, completely dressed. Boots on the floor just in case I needed to flee rapidly. Sleep arrived reluctantly. I didn't merely stir. I woke suddenly because someone was atop my roof. Heavy boot sounds grinding directly above my position. Not a beast, not snow sliding down, genuine footsteps. Step, step, step. Moving along the roofing toward the farthest corner of the structure. Then silence fell. I whispered, "Good heavens! Good heavens!" repetitively. My hands were trembling, so violently the bed frame shook. I retrieved my phone and dialed the local law enforcement office. A receiver answered. I attempted to maintain my voice's evenness. "There is an individual on my roof. I'm located at Aspen Gulch Lodge near Ridgeview Road. I heard walking noises. I'm not imagining things." She didn't discount my words. "Probably a frequent occurrence in remote towns. Stay within. Secure your entry points. A deputy is en route, but the paths are difficult. Estimated arrival time is approximately 40 minutes. 40 minutes. I thanked her and ended the call. The footsteps did not return. No sounds whatsoever except the storm's roar. Every minute felt like an eternity. I detected a truck motor outside before I saw the illumination. Then a sharp knock. "Sheriff's Department, you may open the door." I admitted the officer. A young man called Deputy Callahan. Snow covered his outer garment. He surveyed the interior with his torchlight. "You mentioned someone was on your roof." "Yes, I swear I heard it. Footsteps plainly as day." He didn't chuckle. He didn't smirk. He simply nodded his head. "Allow me to examine the exterior." "Stay put." He ventured back into the blizzard. For a quarter of an hour, I walked back and forth, pulse racing. When he reappeared, he dusted ice from his cap. His voice was composed, but his gaze was not. "You were accurate. There are footprints up there." My chest tightened immediately. "Appears whoever it was climbed onto your air conditioning unit, hoisted themselves up, then moved across the roofing. No evidence they forced entry, though." I inquired, "Why on earth would someone attempt that?" He shrugged lightly. "Individuals wandering near cabins isn't unheard of during inclement weather. Could be someone lost. Could be someone intoxicated. Could be someone checking for vacant dwellings." Then he paused. "But scaling the roof, that's certainly highly irregular." No expletive. He counseled me to wait until morning light. "I will be surveying the immediate vicinity. Contact us if anything else transpires." He left. By the arrival of dawn, the tempest had subsided. Snow lay thickly across the deck surface like white icing. I scarcely managed an hour of sleep. I walked outside and observed the marks. Deputy Callahan had noted them. Faint yet visible, a route extending from the AC mechanism to the roof's edge. Then a jump off into the deep snow pile below. The print path continued into the wooded area. It appeared someone had been observing the cabin from a vantage point. I completed the last cleaning details of the lodge, packed my possessions, and drove away as rapidly as the snowplows permitted. 2 weeks later, Deputy Callahan called me. "We've received 2 additional reports of someone moving around cabins in your sector. Identical footprints, same actions, nearing windows, walking on roofs." I felt sickened. "Did you apprehend him?" "Not yet. But listen, whoever this is, they possess familiarity with the terrain. They avoid surveillance devices. They move silently. My suspicion is they are residing out there. Perhaps displaced. Perhaps evading law enforcement. Just remain cautious." The sheriff's department never located the individual. I rented the cabin subsequently, and new occupants never reported anything odd. But every time I return alone, I cannot avoid visualizing someone watching from the forest line or worse, standing upon the roof once more. I was 13 the winter my whole reality shifted for me. Before then I wasn't a fearful, apprehensive personality. I was a child from Burlington, Vermont, accustomed to snow squalls, used to being left by myself for a few hours, accustomed to assuming the globe was generally secure. But that evening, That one terrible night, I realized otherwise. My designation is Jalen Price, and this occurred long before I truly comprehended what genuine dread feels like. My guardians had recently begun leaving me unattended on the weekends, since my mother took on additional hours at the medical center, and my father held a job at a repair shop outside the city limits. They were not neglectful parents. They simply trusted my judgment. I'd always been the dependable student in class, the person instructors requested to gather assignments, the one neighbors hired to look after their animals. But storms consistently felt different. Our residence was situated at the base of a dead-end road with an enormous rear lawn that bordered the forest. Not a pleasant, small cluster of trees. Actual deep Vermont wilderness, where the rushing air sounds like murmurs on some evenings. Our cellar wasn't unsettling in the typical movie sense. It was finished completely. Carpeting, television, antique sofa, my father's exercise machine, but it contained one extended horizontal pane facing the backyard area. When you were situated down there at dusk, that glass panel always felt like an eye watching, like something could be observing inward, and you would never know unless it desired you to. That night, December 19th, the snow event had been announced for multiple days. Schools closed prematurely. Roads became treacherous by 5 in the afternoon. Visibility decreased to virtually nothing. My parents departed around 6:30. 3 hours maximum, my mother stated, pulling on her winter neck wrap. Call if anything seems strange. It's fine. Nothing's going to seem strange, I replied, rolling my eyes slightly. My father tousled my hair. Yes, the big man has everything managed. They exited laughing softly, and I recall thinking, this will be simple. I'll play games, consume frozen snacks, go to bed. I had zero awareness of what awaited my discovery. You need to understand one detail. We formerly had a neighbor behind us, named Old Mr. Laurel. He resided solitary, rarely spoke, and consistently used to complain about children near the woods, even when none of us were out there. My older cousin once told me Laurel spotted figures in the trees, dark shapes moving between tree trunks. I dismissed all of that nonsense. I was a youth, not gullible. But that evening around 7:30 in the evening, I absolutely believe I heard a noise moving within the tree line. Not distinct footsteps, more like scraping, long, slow, massive. I muted the television set and concentrated intensely. The gale was frantic outside, like it was striking the house forcefully. But beneath that roar, I heard something else entirely, like an individual walking with significant weight. I forced myself to disregard the sensation and return to playing the electronic game. That's precisely what adolescents do. Pretend nothing is amiss until it becomes too awful to continue the pretense. It was 8:03 in the evening when it suddenly happened. I was in the middle of the game when bam! Something impacted the basement window from the outside so fiercely the controller slipped from my grasp. I froze solid. Didn't even take a breath. Just stared at that cursed window. Snow drifted horizontally in heavy sheets, pounding against the thick glass. But underneath the wind-driven snow, I noticed small, pale fragments sliding down the surface. Perhaps some ice fell. That was my very first rationalization. Yeah, likely just ice, I whispered to myself quietly, but I never fully accepted the idea. Then 2 minutes later, another impact, far more forceful. This time, I jumped up so rapidly the chair tumbled over behind my back. No way in hell that's ice, I mumbled quietly. Something was out there beyond the glass. I bolted upstairs, trying to appear more courageous than I inwardly felt. The residence was quiet except for the blizzard assaulting the roof and the faint clattering of window glass. I proceeded to the utility room, activated the backyard floodlight, and peered out through the clear glass door. I couldn't observe the full lawn, due to our immense masonry privacy barrier. I despised that structure right at that moment. It formed an ideal hidden corner. Hello, I called out like a complete fool. Is anyone out there? Of course, no one answered back, but I heard grinding sounds like feet moving slowly in deep snow. I cracked the door, just enough space to lean out. The intense cold hit me immediately, snow crystals pelting my face sharply. Hey, who is out there right now? I yelled forcefully. That's when I observed it. Movement behind the high wall. A dark figure crouching perfectly still. My mind grasped for the initial explanation it could offer. Trevor. Buddy, if you're pulling a practical joke on me. Trevor was my older relative. He enjoyed tricks, so it made perfect sense for half a second. But the shadowy form didn't shift like Trevor. It didn't even react when I addressed it. I felt a cold knot forming in my gut. Nope. 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 I slammed the door shut and locked it securely. My hands were shaking when I reached for the phone. I dialed my mother's number. Hey, is everything all right? She inquired, sounding slightly preoccupied. Is Trevor here? Did he mention he was coming over? My voice broke and cracked. No. Why? What is the matter? Someone is in the backyard area. What? They were throwing something at the basement window, and they're definitely still out there. I saw a person. She put me on speakerphone instantly. Where's your father? I demanded. I'm here, he said firmly. Jalen, is this merely some child fooling around? I don't know. I whispered softly. They are concealing themselves behind that wall. My mother's tone suddenly hardened. We are returning home now. Lock every entrance, all of them. My father added sternly. Stay only upstairs. Do not move near any of the glass panes. Then another unfamiliar voice joined the telephone conversation. My mother must have discreetly called 911. I heard her declare, Yes, my child is home alone. There's an intruder in our backyard property during this blizzard. I headed upstairs to my sleeping area, closed the access door, extinguished the lights, and patiently waited. The wind screamed loudly. Snow struck the windows in relentless bursts. The entire residence creaked like it was struggling to remain intact. But then, unexpectedly, someone moved past my second-floor window. The outline was excessively tall to be a teenager, and the way he inclined toward the glass, slowly, deliberately, felt profoundly wrong on a terrifying level I cannot adequately convey. I dropped down immediately. Jalen, my mother's voice called out through the receiver. What just happened? He's upstairs now, I whispered quickly. He's watching. He's looking through the windows. My father swore loudly in the background. My mother said, Stay low. Do not move at all. I didn't. I literally couldn't move. And then a thud against my bedroom window. Something impacted the glass forcefully. A second hit. A third impact. Hey! A man's voice yelled from the outside, muffled by the relentless storm. And it was not a young person's voice. It was deeper, rougher in quality, like someone much older, someone filled with rage. Open up. I know you're in there, kid. My entire body went numb with cold fear. My mother must have distinctly heard him, because she gasped audibly. Oh my God, the law enforcement officers are nearly here. Stay down low, sweetheart. I pushed myself flat against the hard floor, vibrating uncontrollably from the shock. Come to the window, the man shouted again harshly. No way. Not in a million years was I going to do that. He struck the glass once more, hard enough to visibly vibrate the entire window frame. Then it completely stopped. Just ceased. Utter silence except for the continuing storm. Those 5 minutes felt like 5 long hours. When the doorbell finally sounded, it startled me nearly as much as the man's actions. I crept down the staircase slowly and examined the small peephole. A female officer was standing there. Snow had accumulated on her official hat, flashlight gripped in her hand. I opened the door a slight crack. Jalen Price, she asked calmly. I'm Officer Rowan. Are you all right? No, I replied with honesty. She conducted a complete search of the yard perimeter, checking behind the brick wall, the small shed, the patio furniture, the deep trees. I observed her movements through the glass. After 10 minutes had passed, she came back inside. Footprints are everywhere, she stated. Whoever it was walked the entire yard, right up to every single window. I swallowed hard with difficulty. Did you actually see anyone? No, but the way those prints abruptly stopped near the dense woods. She paused, clearly selecting her words carefully. He departed very recently. Extremely recently. She remained with me until my parents finally arrived home. My mother in tears of relief, my father intensely furious. The officer conferred with them for an extended period of time. At one moment, I overheard her explain. With the intensity of the storm, visibility was exceptionally low. It's highly possible he was merely scoping out houses. You should definitely install motion-activated lights. Scoping out houses. Terrific. When she finally left, my father sat beside me gently and said firmly, "The next time you call us immediately, don't ever think you're bothering us." I simply nodded but could not utter a single word, because there was one crucial detail I never told them. One observation I kept hidden within me for years and years. When the officer was meticulously checking the yard, I distinctly saw something from the upstairs window. Not the aggressive man, not just footprints, but a prolonged, heavy drag mark leading from our property boundaries into the deepest woods, as if something massive had been physically pulled away. No one believed my account when I eventually mentioned it later. They simply said it was residual plow truck marks or heavy snow dragged by the intense wind. But I know exactly what I observed. I know someone was out there in the peak of that storm, and they were not by themselves at all. I've perpetually despised the noise of air currents vibrating secure glass panes. It brings to mind my adolescence lying sleepless within my parents' dilapidated rental property back in Detroit, hearing the ancient wall panels smack forcefully against the structural frame whenever a winter tempest descended. The residence was frigid, permeated with drafts, and tilted in every imaginable way. But those cold seasons, truly, they embedded themselves inside my essence. Perhaps that explains why, even as an adult, I continued engaging in foolish behaviors, like consenting to isolated winter excursions in the Highlands. A certain aspect of my nature was always attempting to demonstrate that the deep cold no longer affected me, that I had progressed beyond it. But the night I am about to recount to you, that night served as a brutal reminder that the chill can still extinguish life just as easily as anything with breath. It transpired 4 years prior, when 2 companions and I decided to occupy a lengthy weekend at a secluded lodge near Blacktail Divide, Colorado, a location so cut off that the nearest refueling station was 50 kilometers distant, and the approach road to the cabin wasn't even paved with asphalt. The precise type of location residents caution you not to visit during any severe storm. But since when have we ever paid heed to the warnings of local inhabitants? I had been partnered with Riley, a digital artist residing in Phoenix. Kind woman, bright, resilient, but completely unfamiliar when it came to heavy snow. She had never even owned substantial winter boots prior to this excursion. She did possess this innate spirit for adventure, however, constantly striving to keep pace with me, even when I told her it wasn't necessary. My dearest friend Lucas had extended the invitation to us. He craved one final untamed winter before I become excessively tedious, as he phrased it. He had recently become engaged to Lena, a server from Albuquerque, who had encountered snow exactly twice before agreeing to join our group. So there we were assembled. Myself, a fellow bearing deep childhood cold-weather trauma. Riley, a desert native endeavoring to impress me. Lucas, the adrenaline enthusiast. Lena, the one who most likely should have declined this entire proposition. We all convened at my dwelling in Denver on a Thursday evening, and early Friday morning, we began our drive toward the mountainous terrain. None of us grasped that the storm accelerating directly toward Blacktail Divide was the variety that seals off major routes, immobilizes snow removal equipment, and shuts down entire villages. We merely desired a pleasant weekend. Snowboarding activity, consuming beverages, shared laughter, innocent, harmless amusement. It is astonishing how rapidly harmless events can turn ominous. The cabin was the property of Lucas's uncle, a wilderness expert who resided the majority of his existence alone and passed away alone too. The cabin had not been occupied since his demise. And believe me, the neglect was obvious. When we halted the truck on the prolonged gravel path, ruts frozen into sharp, uneven lines beneath the tires. The structure resembled something extracted from a cinematic production. A-frame profile roof, deeply toned green siding, expansive porch area, chimney tilting slightly. Snow already coated the ground surface, but only a few centimeters deep. The major storm had not yet struck. "Mate!" Lucas exclaimed, leaping out of the vehicle. Convince me this doesn't radiate mountain energy. It radiates something, I mumbled back, retrieving our travel bags. Riley nudged me gently with her elbow. Stop being so overdramatic. It's charming. Charming, correct? The interior smelled intensely of stale wood and aged footwear. Dust motes everywhere. The fireplace was cold. The premises had not hosted a living person in a long stretch of time. But after the passage of a couple of hours, we managed to generate warmth. The fire crackled brightly. The electrical generator hummed softly. Lights flickered in that peculiarly unsettling manner of old cabins. The overall strategy was simple. Day 1, settle in fully. Day 2, snowboarding activities plus wilderness exploration. Day 3, socializing and consuming drinks. Day 4, return the drive home. We failed to progress beyond Day 2. We were situated outside that first evening, sitting submerged in the hot tub unit on the rear deck. Steam ascended through the bitterly cold air. The sky appeared a bruised purple hue, heavy with the promise of additional snow yet to arrive. Lena tilted her head suddenly. Did you perceive that sound? Lucas splashed water playfully toward her. Perceive what? A moose passing gas in the woods. No, genuinely. She gestured toward the line of trees. It sounded like, I don't know, a low humming sound. Really low humming. I strained to listen. Nothing discernible but the wind noise. You are detecting the generator, I suggested. No, this was distinct. She wrapped her arms tightly around her own body. Riley whispered, That's eerie. I should have paid closer attention then. Should have treated her observation with seriousness. But I simply chuckled it off, leaned back into the tub, and allowed the water's heat to dissipate the tension. That was initial major error number 1. I woke around 6 in the morning to a profound silence. Not an ordinary quietness. A dense quiet. The specific kind you only encounter just before something massive is about to strike. I ventured outside and the world appeared wrong. Snow descending so heavily I could barely see 3 meters directly in front of me. Wind howling unrestrainedly through the massive trees, the sky totally white and opaque, and the air temperature was brutal. As I stood there observing the storm consuming the entire valley, I experienced a peculiar sensation, as if the very atmosphere itself was vibrating. I could not articulate the feeling. Inside, everyone was stirring awake. Lucas was already pulling on his heavy boots, grinning like a small child. We are trekking up the ridge today. No boards, only boots. He patted my back strongly. Are you prepared? I was. Naturally, I was. Even though a disturbing thought was already gnawing at the back of my consciousness, that ancient childhood fear whispering internally. Storms conceal things. But I shoved the thought away, because that is my established pattern. We set off around 11 in the morning. Snow accumulating rapidly. Wind slicing at us horizontally. Visibility plummeted completely. Riley remained inside with Lena. Their plan involved a movie afternoon, with hot cocoa consumption. Warm, safe, intelligent. Precisely what I should have opted to do. Lucas and I proceeded up the narrow ridge path, a constrained trail cutting through dense pine stands. He was roaring with laughter, shouting over the relentless wind. A total madman. I kept darting glances over my shoulder behind me, unsure why I did this. Perhaps because the snowstorm possessed that strangling sensation, like sound waves get absorbed, like the entire mountain holds its breath suspended. Halfway up the trail, Lucas suddenly yelled, Mate, tell me this isn't the most incredible experience ever. I was just about to yell a reply when I distinctly heard it. A low, resonant groan. Not the noise of an animal. Not the sound of the wind. It was human. Maybe 45 meters behind our position, but impossible to locate visually through the thick storm. I spun around quickly. Lucas, did you hear that? Hear what? Another prolonged groan. Longer this time. A slight tremor traveled through the ground beneath our boots. Lucas immediately ceased walking. Okay. Yes, I heard that particular one. We exchanged looks, both trying desperately to pretend the experience wasn't terrifying. Likely just the wind playing tricks, he offered weakly. No chance in hell. You don't mature in Detroit winters and not comprehend the inherent difference. But neither of us wanted to acknowledge the truth, so we continued our hike, moving faster now. That was second major error number 2. We didn't perceive actual footsteps initially, only a crunching noise. Soft, slow, clearly deliberate. Lucas froze in place. "Are you hearing that?" I nodded my head. "Someone is directly behind us," I whispered hushly. "No way. No conceivable way anyone else is foolish enough to be up here at this very moment." Crunch, crunch, crunch. Getting noticeably closer. We could not discern anything visually. Just swirling sheets of white. I yelled out, "Hey! Hello! Who is there?" No response. Only the persistent crunching. Steady, unhurried, as if whoever it was could see our position perfectly clearly. Lucas seized my arm tightly. "We need to turn back immediately." Yeah. We commenced descending much faster than I believed my legs could manage in the deep snow. The following footsteps maintained their pursuit. Same exact distance, same controlled speed. Not gaining ground, not falling behind, just precisely matching our pace. That terrified me more than anything else. People become exhausted. People lose their footing. People stumble and fall. Whatever was behind us did not exhibit any such frailty. We reached perhaps halfway down when I felt my mobile phone vibrate intensely, finally hitting a small pocket with weak signal strength. 7 missed text messages, all originating from Riley. "Are you guys returning? Someone is outside the cabin. There are 2 individuals. They're circling the cabin perimeter. One of them peered into the window. Please respond. Where exactly are you?" My stomach dropped violently. I attempted to reply, but the message failed to transmit. I dialed her number and was sent straight to voicemail immediately. "Lucas," I stated, my voice trembling uncontrollably. "We must move now." We literally sprinted, slipping, sliding, falling hard, scrambling back up. Snow whipped our faces until they were raw, the groaning sound behind us intensifying, sounding angrier. At one point on the path, Lucas urgently grabbed my sleeve. "Mate, that thing, whatever in God's name it is. It's right behind us, closer now." I refused to look back over my shoulder. I had no desire to know what was there. When the cabin structure finally materialized through the relentless storm, I felt an intense wave of relief, so powerful it nearly caused me to collapse to my knees. We hammered frantically on the heavy door until Riley pulled it open, forcefully yanking us into the interior. She was extremely pale, her eyes bloodshot from recent crying, her hands shaking uncontrollably. "What exactly happened?" I asked breathlessly. She gestured toward the windows, which were now covered with improvised blankets. There were 2 figures out there walking so slowly. One came right up to the front living room window and just absolutely stared. Didn't utter a single thing. Didn't knock loudly. Just stood there. Lena added, her voice cracking with fear. And they weren't wearing appropriate clothing, like not suitable winter apparel. One looked like he was in simple jeans and a hoodie, bare hands visible, no hat protection, absolutely nothing. Lucas whispered softly, "No way they could have survived out there dressed like that." "That's exactly what I'm saying," Riley snapped back. "Who in the hell walks around during a blizzard like this without freezing completely to death?" I did not possess an immediate answer because I understood precisely what she was implying. Whatever entity followed us did not sound or behave in a human way. Night descended rapidly. The storm worsened dramatically. The wind shrieked intensely. Snow piled up hard against the door. We tried unsuccessfully to divert our attention with a movie. But 30 minutes into it, boom, boom, boom. 3 distinct, hard knocks on the main front door. Riley screamed out loud. Lena covered her mouth with her hands. Lucas instinctively reached for the shotgun he had located in the small storage room. "Do not open it," I whispered fiercely. "No expletive chance," he replied back. We waited in terrified silence. Another synchronized set of knocks came, slower this time. Boom, boom, boom. Someone loudly clearing ice from their throat just outside the door. And then a terrible voice, low, rough-sounding, like vocal cords had been scraped raw. "Let me in." No discernible emotion, no sense of urgency, just profoundly wrong. I felt tears begin to sting my eyes. Some ancient childhood fear was sinking its claws deep into me. Riley clutched my arm so hard that it caused physical pain. "Oh my God! Do not let him enter! Do not let him enter!" We didn't shift position, that we didn't speak a word. We didn't even dare to take a breath. 5 minutes elapsed. 10. 15. Nothing further. No sounds of footsteps departing. Complete silence. Like he was still standing right there listening intently. We decided to attempt sleeping in the cabin's living room. All 4 of us together, lights kept on, fire extinguished, the shotgun fully loaded. Around 3 in the morning, I woke abruptly to a sound that turned my stomach completely to ice. Something was circling the cabin slowly, with profound deliberation, snow crunching under heavy, measured steps. Lucas whispered, "They are definitely back." "They," I whispered back. I perceived 2 different sets. He was correct. 2 distinct auditory rhythms, one slow and heavy, one dragging a portion of a foot. They encircled us completely for almost an hour straight. Then a soft tapping noise on the external wall. Then the window glass. Not a loud knock, just a gentle tapping, like carefully testing the pane. I couldn't even force myself to glance toward the window. If I saw a face staring back, I knew instantly I would scream uncontrollably. At some point, sheer exhaustion overcame the paralyzing fear, and I briefly drifted into unconsciousness. I woke to the sight of daylight and blessed silence. We gathered our belongings quickly and chaotically. Didn't even attempt to eat any breakfast. We just wanted desperately to leave. When I stepped outside onto the porch, a sudden sight made my stomach violently lurch. All around the entire cabin perimeter, there were no footprints. None whatsoever. Not a single indentation visible in the snow. Fresh snow had fallen since we were inside, absolutely, but not nearly enough to completely erase everything. Not enough to conceal the tracks of someone who had actively circled the cabin for a full hour. Riley whispered faintly, Where did they actually go?" No one could provide an answer because we all instinctively knew the terrifying truth. Something had been present outside. Something that did not leave any recognizable tracks. Something that did not succumb to the intense cold. Something that did not need to rush itself. Something that moved completely through a blizzard like it was utterly nothing at all. We didn't exchange a single word the entire desperate ride back to Denver. To this present day, none of us can fully agree on the nature of what happened that night. But every winter season, every single time the wind violently shakes my secure windows, I instinctively think about that chilling voice outside the isolated cabin, that unsettling knock, that bassy moaning sound echoing in the woods, and I fervently pray to whatever higher power is listening closely that I never have to perceive it again, because that night in that ferocious storm, something actively walked alongside us. Something unervingly followed us all the way home, and I sincerely do not believe it was fundamentally human. I matured in a territory where the winter season didn't simply arrive. It consumed everything whole. I was born in Juneau, Alaska, and if you've ever dwelled here for an adequate duration, you inherently recognize the land possesses its own distinct voice. Some speculate it's the fierce air current. Some suggest it's the raw, untamed wilderness itself. My deceased grandmother frequently used to declare it was the ancient entities residing beneath the frozen surface. I consistently assumed she was partially jesting, but subsequent to everything that unfolded on that specific night in December, the evening the snowstorm struck prematurely, and with great force, I understood my grandmother spoke truthfully, not even in the slightest. I am recounting this experience because I still fail to logically understand what occurred. I have attempted to make sense of the events objectively, logically, but there exists a segment of that night that defies every established fact I possess about the world, and the beginning was marked by a missing canine companion. I had been romantically involved with Landon Reeves for nearly 11 months. He resided with his 2 parents, Rick and Holly Reeves, in a settlement called Taku Riverbend, a brief expanse of land situated approximately 20 minutes outside Juneau. In that area, residences stood widely separated, delineated by thick forest rather than simple fencing. Snow accumulated profoundly enough to completely engulf smaller automobiles. Landon's family dwelling was one of those classic Alaskan structures. Solid timber construction, verdant moss clinging to the roofline, a front porch that permanently exuded the scent of pine wood and intense cold air. The Reeves family were not wealthy, but they lived comfortably, and they possessed a remarkably good nature. Especially Rick. He embodied what we designate a true Alaskan local, a person who could skillfully repair a snowmobile in total darkness, using merely a small utility knife and adhesive tape. 3 weeks preceding the primary events, Rick acquired an 8-week-old Alaskan Husky puppy. The most adorable little creature. They named him Cody. Cody adored everyone he met, particularly myself. He would rush toward me the instant I stepped through that threshold, his tail whipping back and forth, eyes shining brightly, as if I represented his entire existence. That young pup never disregarded a verbal command. Not a single time. That characteristic is what rendered the night so frightening. It was a Friday evening. I had arrived to occupy the weekend with Landon, since a serious snowstorm was projected for early Saturday morning, and the driving conditions would rapidly become perilous. But Alaskan weather patterns disregard predictions. By 3 in the afternoon, heavy gray cloud cover had already begun consolidating low above the mountain ridges. By 6 in the evening, the strong wind had turned razor-sharp, carrying minuscule fragments of ice that painfully stung exposed skin. By 8, the tempest was already whispering its presence through the standing trees. That slow, unsettling high-pitched tone the residents simply refer to as white noise. A brief time after 9, Rick stepped outside briefly to bring Cody indoors. The dog was not present, probably sheltering behind the shed. Landon had initially hypothesized. The wind is simply agitating him. But the wind was not even close to the most disturbing element. Cody, come here, boy. Cody. Hey, pup. Let's go. We were calling out his name repeatedly and loudly, but the rear yard, the entire stretch of snow-illuminated forest behind the building remained deathly quiet. I could perceive a wave of panic constricting my chest. This is not normal behavior, I whispered. He always responds to us, Landon confirmed, favoring his right leg slightly as he stood near the back entry point. His right foot was encased in a rigid orthopedic boot. He had slipped on treacherous black ice the previous week and fractured 2 small bones. He was explicitly advised not to walk extensively. Rick opened the main entrance and spoke to a delivery person. Yes, the storm is commencing earlier than they had indicated. Holly was still occupied at her workplace for another 60 minutes. It was only the 3 of us inside the house's confines. And unexpectedly, I felt this terrible, internal sinking feeling. Something felt fundamentally wrong. I seized my heavy snow boots from the mudroom hanging hooks, my heart pounding forcefully. I'm venturing outside briefly, I said. I'll thoroughly check the entire perimeter. Be careful, Landon cautioned. The floor is slick from the snow I tracked in earlier. He was speaking the truth. The tile surface was extremely slick. I thrust my right foot into the first boot, cinching the strap tightly. The second boot remained wet inside, intensely cold against my toes. As I attempted to fit it on, I hopped sideways across the kitchen area, trying to get nearer to the rear exit. My foot suddenly slipped out from under me. It transpired instantly, far too quickly to correct. I slammed down hard onto my left kneecap, an acute pain exploding throughout the joint. My free leg propelled forward violently, as if it belonged to a separate entity. Then the force of gravity pulled me backward toward the floor. I distinctly recall thinking, this is going to fracture my skull open. The kitchen tile was solid and unyielding, and I was falling with my full body weight. But just before the back of my head connected with the tile, 2 hands firmly secured me. Firm, substantial, warm to the touch. One hand braced my upper back area. The other clamped down on my shoulder, steady, immensely strong, holding my body upright and stable. The intense grip was unmistakably human in form. Not weak, not ethereal. Human. I clearly felt 5 individual fingers. I felt distinct pressure being applied. I felt the powerful squeeze. I gasped in surprise. Holy expletive. Thank you. I whispered automatically. I presumed it was Landon's father. Who else possibly could it be? Landon could barely walk rapidly, and he was standing directly in front of me, not positioned behind. But when I quickly turned around, absolutely no one was present, not even a faint shadow. I remained seated on the floor in sheer shock, breathing heavily. Snowflakes swirled past the back door's glass pane. The wind wailed relentlessly against the siding material. Landon limped toward me awkwardly. Hey, are you all right? I fell. I believe your father caught me. My dad? He inquired, a deep frown settling on his face. Dad's currently at the main entrance. No, he was behind me. I maintained firmly. He grabbed hold of me. Landon. He physically caught me before I struck my head. Landon shook his head slowly, looking utterly confused. What are you referring to? I've been observing you the entire time. No one approached you from behind. My stomach churned violently. Rick entered the kitchen just at that moment, dusting snow from his thick coat. Is everything all right? He asked. I heard a loud noise. Your wife's girl took an accidental tumble, Landon explained. I rushed to help. But you physically caught me, correct? You came in right behind my fall. Rick simply blinked. Caught you? Honey, I wasn't even in this room. I was still out on the front deck, conversing with the driver. I stared intently at both of them. No, I whispered again. Someone firmly grabbed me. Someone physically assisted me. Landon and Rick exchanged silent glances, the type you give an individual when they appeared disoriented from a sudden shock. But I wasn't disoriented. I knew precisely the sensation I had experienced. In spite of what had just transpired, or perhaps because of it, I finished putting on my boots and pushed outward into the encroaching storm. Rick grabbed his thick gloves. We are absolutely not losing that dog tonight, he declared firmly. Not out here in this. The wind had increased in volume, sweeping up dense sheets of snow that fiercely slapped against our heavy jackets. The world was blinding white, not a gentle white, a violently turbulent white. We examined the perimeter of the yard. We checked the space near the shed. We inspected the snowblower that rested under a heavy tarp. Nothing to be found. Cody, Rick shouted loudly. Boy, no response bark, no whimper, only the deafening roar of the wind. Landon stood at the back entrance, holding it slightly ajar, shouting specific directions. Check by the wooden fence. He might have crawled beneath the elevated deck. Try the area near the old fire pit. But he couldn't venture out himself, and the storm kept intensifying in severity. I rounded the corner portion of the house and observed a sight that chilled me far more intensely than the weather. A distinct trail of tiny paw prints, exactly Cody's size, leading directly toward the line of trees. But the small prints were not normal. Each little paw mark was positioned far apart, excessively far, as if the puppy wasn't walking naturally, like he was being rapidly dragged or running in huge, desperate leaps. But not in the standard pattern puppies run. Not playful, not normal. Something fundamentally felt wrong about their spacing. Rick! I yelled sharply. He stomped heavily through the snow, toward my position. What have you found? I pointed downward. His facial expression tightened immediately. That isn't correct. We pursued the print marks, but after approximately 4.5 meters, they simply ceased, as if something had effortlessly lifted the dog straight into the air. Where in the hell did he go? I whispered, horrified. Rick remained silent because there was no plausible explanation. We were preparing to turn back when something shifted quickly in the trees. A rapid blur, a vague shape, something low to the ground but moving at great speed. I firmly grabbed Rick's arm. Did you see that? Yeah, he muttered in response. Yes, I saw it. We both retreated backward several steps. The storm howled so fiercely it sounded like the air itself was screaming at us. But above the wind's shriek, I swear it, I heard a quiet voice, a soft man's voice. It distinctly whispered my specific name. Not loudly, not from a distance, but immediately behind my left shoulder. Hey! I spun around instantly. No one visible. Only rapidly swirling snow. Rick didn't appear to hear it at all. He continued scanning the trees nervously. But I heard it again clearly, only much closer. Hey! A distinct puff of breath near my ear. I slapped my hand defensively over the side of my neck and stumbled backward sharply. Rick caught me instantly. What happened? Someone's out here. I shouted. Someone whispered my name. Before I could fully finish, a sound suddenly tore through the trees. A sharp, high-pitched, absolutely terrified yelp. Cody! Rick bolted forward without hesitation. That's him, I know it. We ran deeper into the mass of trees following the sound, slipping through the deep snow that reached nearly up to my knees. The wind severely sliced at our exposed faces. Branches groaned and cracked under the accumulated weight of the ice. Cody, hold on, little guy. Rick yelled. Another yelp, this time sounding muffled. We pushed forward until we reached a small open clearing. And there, partially buried in the deep snow, trembling violently, was Cody. But a crucial detail was strange. He was not alone there. There were fresh footprints all around his small body. Immense ones, unmistakably human ones, clearly bare feet in the snow. Deep, distinct, perfectly formed, and they completely circled Cody like an individual had been standing directly over him. Rick cursed loudly. What in the holy expletive? Cody scrambled frantically toward me, whimpering uncontrollably, burying his face frantically against my leg. But the ambient air around us felt utterly wrong. Thick, electrically charged, like static electricity crawling rapidly across your exposed skin. I grasped the small pup, quickly scooped him up, and said firmly, "We must retreat now." Rick offered no argument. We sprinted back through the tangled trees, Cody shaking uncontrollably and continuously in my arms. When we finally reached the interior, Landon shouted, "Oh, thank heaven you're safe." He attempted rushing over, but winced loudly from the severe pain. "Cody, buddy." The puppy ran immediately toward Landon, curling up tightly against him, still exhibiting a slight twitch. Rick securely locked all 3 exit doors. Then he turned directly to me, his expression serious in a manner I'd never before witnessed. "What exactly did you observe out there?" I swallowed hard. "Barefoot human prints," I whispered softly, circling him. Landon frowned deeply. "Barefoot? Who in the absolute hell is out in the snow barefoot during a raging storm?" Rick exhaled heavily and slowly. "They are old stories," he muttered quietly. Landon rolled his eyes dramatically. "Dad, please do not start that fantasy expletive." Rick snapped back sharply. "The genuine stories. The indigenous ones. The tales from before this entire territory was crisscrossed with roads." "What exactly do they do?" I whispered, chilled. Rick stared directly at me. "They take things. Small animals. Sometimes they take people when the severe storms become truly bad." My skin suddenly crawled all over. "And you sincerely believe one of them was out there?" Rick offered no verbal answer. His complete silence conveyed more loudly than any spoken statement. I had not mentioned the hands that caught me when I fell, the distinct squeeze on my terrified shoulders, the soft whisper heard in the storm's core, because if I had told them, Landon would instantly assume I struck my head badly, and Rick would wholeheartedly believe it, perhaps too easily. But that night, when everyone else had finally succumbed to sleep except for myself, I meticulously replayed the entire sequence over and over and over. Someone had definitely been positioned behind me. Someone effortlessly lifted me up. Someone softly whispered my name aloud. Someone who remained completely unseen. And that brings me to the final element I have never disclosed to anyone else, not even Landon. When I was preparing to settle in for the night, I closed the small bathroom door and gazed intensely at the mirror's surface. My shoulders ached faintly. A strange discomfort, not bruised visibly, just intensely sore, as if someone had gripped them with force several hours earlier. I slightly lifted my shirt, turned my body sideways, and examined the area. There were faint fingerprints, not full dark marks, not actual bruises, but incredibly faint pressure lines, as though 5 cold fingers had firmly squeezed the flesh before vanishing instantly. And then, outside the bathroom window, past the rapidly descending snow, past the intense darkness, past the raging storm, a towering figure stood at the very edge of the yard perimeter, tall, gaunt, utterly motionless, and clearly barefoot. I froze instantly. It did not move. It did not visibly blink. It simply stood there silently, as if observing the entire house structure, intently watching me. I whispered, "No, no, no, no." Its elongated head tilted slowly, with chilling deliberation, like it recognized my presence. Then the wind suddenly rose sharply. Snow cut fiercely across the glass pane. And when the intense gust settled down slightly, the figure was completely gone, vanished like it had been a mere illusion. But something deep within me asserts it was the very same entity that caught me when I fell, and the identical thing that whispered my name in the heart of the storm. That night I slept with all the lights activated. Cody whimpered softly the entire time, and every now and then I was certain I perceived the sound of footsteps crunching on the snow just outside the walls. Bare footsteps. I was raised in a locale where the winter season felt less like a change in weather and much more like a test of mental endurance. If you could successfully navigate through January without shouting aggressively at a fellow citizen, you were officially considered a permanent local. I currently reside in Fargo, North Dakota, and yes, I am fully aware of the common jokes. Why on earth would any sane person choose to live there? Honestly, sometimes I ask myself the very same question. But this specific place is where I was born, where my mother raised me, and where my deepest memories are permanently buried beneath dense strata of ice. At that time, I was 26 years old, working late shifts at a modest print shop establishment and sleeping throughout the daylight hours. My internal biological clock was completely inverted long before this particular event took place. Therefore, staying awake until 3 or even 4 in the morning wasn't at all unusual for my routine. The night this entire episode commenced, I was wide awake, and I swear upon every sacred element in this entire world, what I witnessed was not remotely human. Or it was human, but definitively not from this specific location. My formal name is Reynolds, however. Everyone just defaults to calling me Ray. Not many people remaining in Fargo stay awake at 2:30 in the morning, staring out their kitchen window during the peak of a snowstorm. But that activity pretty much constitutes my entire personality profile. My established routine was simple. Prepare a cup of hot tea, watch the dense snow blow sideways, allow my overactive brain to finally settle down. That specific night, though, something entirely different settled into my existence. Something that continues to generate real fear out of me. It occurred in late January, 6 years ago. One of those classic nights where the snow impacts the window glass like sharp sand, and the wind sounds furious enough to literally strip the roofing material off the structure. The entire house visibly trembled every time a severe gust slammed violently into it. I had just finished a grueling night shift at my workplace. The heating system in my aging pickup truck had completely failed a week prior. So when I entered my kitchen that particular night, I still carried the intense cold clinging to me like a persistent second skin. I put a container of water on the stove burner, rubbed my hands together briskly, and muttered an appropriate phrase like, "Goddamn Fargo winters. Feels like the earth is actively attempting to eliminate us." My mother, if she had been alive during that specific time, would have inevitably responded with something similar to, "Ray, winter genuinely builds character." Perhaps it does, but more often than not, it simply builds resentment and frustration. I pulled open the window blinds because I habitually check on my vehicle during severe weather events. It's an old rust bucket, a 2003 Ford model that looks like it successfully survived 3 separate divorces and 1 catastrophic tornado. But it remains the only transportation I possess. Snow was descending so thickly it resembled the appearance of static noise on an antique television screen. And then I observed them. 2 male figures positioned side by side walking down my residential street at 2:30 in the morning during a damn blizzard. My immediate thought was not of spectral figures. I am not that susceptible to fear. I do not immediately jump to any supernatural conclusions. I am the pragmatic type of guy who attributes sudden shadows to passing headlights or sudden creaks to settling old wood. But these 2 individuals, something fundamental about them struck me directly in the spine. They were walking at a slow, measured pace, not trudging laboriously, not actively fighting the strong wind resistance, simply strolling along as if they were enjoying a calm summer evening promenade. No rational person does that during a severe Fargo blizzard. No human physically can. I leaned my body closer to the window, squinting hard. Both figures wore dark outer coats, not designed winter coats, not thick down parkas or highly insulated heavy jackets. Just simple coats, like the kind one might wear in the mild autumn season. One of the men calmly lifted his hand and gestured casually while speaking. I could not hear any sound through the thick glass, but he moved as if the strong wind was not aggressively slapping him directly in the face. That is what initially disturbed me the most. People do not move with such ease when the wind chill temperature is hovering near minus 34 degrees Celsius. Curiosity began to prickle intensely, so I reached up and slid the window curtain slightly to the side, allowing myself a more unimpeded view. Not more than 1 single second passed. I swear it wasn't even a full second duration, but the precise moment the curtain fully slid open, they were utterly gone. Not further down the road ahead, not rapidly ducking behind a nearby house structure. Completely gone. The street segment is lengthy and absolutely straight. There are no narrow alleys, no tall fences, absolutely nowhere to instantly conceal themselves. You can see clearly from one established stop sign location to the next. But they had vanished entirely, if they instantly blinked out of all existence. I distinctly remember whispering, "No way. No way. You're hallucinating, expletive, Ray. You're simply exhausted." My heart was pounding fiercely, as if I'd been actively running. I wasn't scared yet, more intensely confused, and thoroughly annoyed. The precise way you feel when you strongly suspect your own eyes are deceiving you. But deep down inside, a tiny, fractured crack of real fear began to widen. I attempted to dismiss it quickly the way most guys tend to do. Pretend the event wasn't odd. Pretend I simply didn't care about it. I returned to preparing my tea, took a seat at the table, and kept intermittently glancing back at the large window like an addict craving satisfaction, needing just one more look. The street remained completely empty. Totally and utterly empty. Still, I did not manage to sleep a wink that entire night. The following night, I firmly resolved I wasn't going to check the window again at all. I did not want to actively feed whatever bizarre paranoia I suspected I was developing rapidly. But you understand the internal conflict. Your brain desperately demands answers. Around 2:25 in the morning, I found myself instinctively making another cup of tea. By 2:30, I was standing fixedly at the window. Nothing visible. Just snow blowing relentlessly sideways. The street lights intermittently flickering, as if they were straining desperately to remain operational. I exhaled slowly, a wave of relief washing over me. See, nothing there. You were merely tired, Ray. I even emitted a small laugh. But the night immediately following that one, everything fundamentally shifted. It was even colder outside. A complete and utter whiteout condition. The wind was howling so aggressively I could hear its intense presence through the very walls, a low deafening roar that felt exactly like being situated inside a massive jet engine. I walked into the kitchen fully expecting the usual severe storm routine. The instant I reached out my hand for the kettle's handle, a strange, cold feeling constricted my abdomen. You know that specific unsettling instinct like when you enter a room and immediately sense something's deeply wrong. That sudden, cold ripple that courses down your back rapidly? Yes, that precise feeling. I advanced toward the window, and my entire body instantly locked up. They had returned. The very same 2 male figures, located at the exact same spot on the road, performing the same slow, casual walk, conversing easily, gesturing with their hands, completely unaffected by the raging storm. My quick breath frosted the interior surface of the window as I involuntarily leaned further forward. What in the hell is this? This time, I didn't hesitate for a moment. I absolutely needed to know if I was actively losing my sanity or not. I slid the curtain to the side quickly, and immediately, they were gone. Not walking away, not rapidly running, simply vanished, as if they were cleanly erased from the visual scene. My hands were now physically shaking, not due to the intense cold, but from something entirely different. Genuine fear, profound confusion, a sense of real wrongness permeated me. I whispered aloud to the empty room. Okay, this is truly messed up. What are you? What in God's name are you? But no one answered my desperate question. For the entire following week, I barely slept at all. I checked the kitchen window every subsequent night. Sometimes I half hoped to see their figures. Other times I fervently prayed I wouldn't. I tried desperately to convince myself, with logical explanations. Maybe it involved some bizarre optical illusion. Perhaps I briefly dozed off while standing upright. Maybe the wind-blown snow created a temporary atmospheric mirage. But deep down, I intuitively knew that was complete expletive. On the 5th consecutive night, I observed something entirely different. Not the two men specifically, but something positioned directly behind them. The snowstorm that night was incredibly brutal. Visibility was practically zero. But somehow, the air immediately surrounding the two men appeared strikingly clearer, as if they were walking within their own small, controlled weather zone. And positioned behind them, way in the distance behind their figures, something that resembled a faint, visible distortion, like heat waves rising from hot asphalt in the summer, but occurring in the absolute middle of a paralyzing blizzard. What exactly are you connected to? I muttered, intensely focused. They did not hear my voice. They didn't slow their pace, didn't turn their heads, just walked as if they were following a predetermined path I simply could not discern. I did not move the curtain this time at all. I kept watching, breathing in slow, measured gulps, my heavy heartbeat thumping loudly in my ears. The fierce wind physically rocked my house structure, but the two men remained completely unfazed. Then, right as the taller one lifted his hand upward to casually gesture again, the nearest street light suddenly flickered rapidly. One quick blink, then two, and when the light instantly returned, they had completely vanished. Without me ever touching the curtain, my knees nearly buckled violently. This was definitely no mere hallucination, no simple coincidence, absolutely no trick played by my eyes. Something impossible was actively walking down my street during blizzards at the exact time of 2:30 in the morning, and I possessed absolutely no understanding as to the reason why. People always say wisely, do not go actively looking for frightening events. I completely agree with that sentiment, but after one continuous week of uncertainty, something inside my resolve completely snapped. Curiosity decisively overcame fear. I urgently needed answers. So one night, when I observed the two male figures approaching again, I swiftly grabbed my coat. Not my thin jacket, not my regular winter outerwear. My industrial strength, double-layered garment. The world-is-ending coat. I forcefully shoved my feet into my heavy boots, slapped on my protective gloves, and cautiously stepped out onto the front porch area. The bitter cold impacted me like a physical fist. "Goddamn," I gasped. Snow sharply stung my exposed face. The wind forcefully shoved me sideways. My visible breath instantly froze around my thick scarf. But the two men continued moving slowly, easily, completely comfortable, as if the storm conditions simply parted specifically for them. I advanced a few steps toward the sidewalk path, instinctively shielding my eyes. "Hey!" I shouted loudly. Nothing. They didn't look up at all, didn't pause for a second, didn't acknowledge my presence whatsoever. I took 3 additional steps forward, my boots crunching deep into the settled snow layer. "Hey! Answer me!" Still nothing. But then, the slightly shorter man subtly turned his head. Only a tiny fraction. Not directly toward me, but as if he detected something's presence. I felt a rush of ice crawl quickly under my skin. I wasn't certain at all if I actually wanted them to see my presence anymore. He lifted his hand deliberately, pointing clearly somewhere ahead of their direction, and that same disturbing, strange heat wave distortion shimmered visibly again, noticeably rising off the cold road surface like invisible ripples of liquid. "What exactly is that?" I whispered, utterly transfixed. It grew stronger, becoming clearer, almost taking the shape of a doorway structure. No definitive edges, no specific color visible, just a profound warping in the surrounding air. The taller man stepped directly toward the distortion's center. My chest tightened severely. Suddenly, every primal instinct within me screamed loudly. Do not go any closer. Do not move near them. Do not approach that bizarre thing. The shorter man then immediately followed him. And then, in one precise stride each, they stepped cleanly into the distortion field. The air visually folded, and they instantly disappeared. Not walked away, not dissolved into nothing. They entered something that looked like a specific passage, like a defined doorway leading straight into nowhere. I stumbled backward, my breath completely caught in my throat, my legs shaking violently. Oh, hell no. Hell no. The full intensity of the snowstorm crashed violently back into reality around my position, the wind howling loud enough to entirely swallow my desperate voice. I ran back inside the house, aggressively slammed the door shut, securely locked it, and sank heavily to the unforgiving floor. I knew with absolute certainty exactly what I had seen. A doorway. A goddamn distinct doorway. Not leading to another known place on this earth, but rather to another entire reality. Another alternate version of my residential street. Another whole world layered directly over the top of ours. A place where those two men naturally belonged, and where I definitely did not. I only witnessed their presence one more final time. 2 weeks later, during the next major blizzard, the exact same time, 2:30 in the morning, the exact same place on the street. But something crucial was completely different. They weren't calm and composed. They weren't casually strolling. They were moving very fast, with great urgency, as if they were actively being pursued by something unseen. The shorter man kept quickly glancing behind their position. The taller one gestured sharply with his arm, as if silently saying, "Keep moving quickly." My skin prickled intensely. Something felt fundamentally wrong, more profoundly wrong than the initial usual wrongness. The wind surrounding them wasn't calm and parted anymore. It was rapidly swirling, visibly twisting, spinning far too tightly around their moving bodies, like the very power of the storm was actively attempting to grab hold of them. And directly behind their figures, that unique distortion returned. But this time, it clearly pulsed, almost like a massive heartbeat rhythm, almost as if some entity on the other side was vigorously pushing its way through. I urgently wanted to look away from the sight. I desperately wanted to back up safely, but I was completely frozen in position, intensely staring. The taller man abruptly reached the distortion field, stepped inside, and was instantly gone. The shorter man was immediately behind him. Then he suddenly stopped dead, turned his body fully, and looked directly at me, his gaze meeting mine, dead in the eyes. A full, unbroken, intense stare, even through the blinding storm, even through the distorting window glass. He looked straight at me as if he had finally and consciously noticed I had been intently watching their movements for multiple days. His expression was not aggressive or angry. It wasn't one of fear. It was distinctly sad, like he was silently saying, "Do not attempt to follow us." Then he quickly stepped backward into the visible distortion. The air folded over itself, and he was gone completely. The distortion field violently snapped shut like a burst bubble, and that was definitively the end of it. I never saw their figures again. 6 years later, I still habitually check that street corner every damn night. It's a routine now. A lingering trauma, perhaps, or simply an overwhelming need to know if whatever world those two men originated from ever crosses paths with mine again. People constantly ask me why I'm so utterly obsessed with monitoring blizzards, why I choose to drink hot tea at 2:30 in the morning, and why I intensely stare outside like I'm impatiently waiting for someone's arrival. Well, now you finally know the complete story. I've witnessed some strange phenomena in my life. Fleeting shadows, sudden loud noises, vague weird feelings, but nothing I could absolutely swear was definitely and unequivocally real. Except for this incident. Two men casually walking completely untouched through raging storms. A distinct doorway existing in the pure snow. Their eyes meeting mine across the terrifying chasm of two different worlds. Maybe there exist other versions of us living out there. Maybe some realities only briefly overlap when the extreme weather conditions tear things thin and vulnerable. Maybe I was either lucky or devastatingly unlucky enough to simply catch a terrifying glimpse. I don't pretend to entirely understand the nature of it. All I know for sure is this absolute truth. Some things fundamentally do not belong to the confines of our world. And sometimes during the absolute worst of the severe storms, our world simply forgets to properly keep them out. I was 6 years old the winter my entire family nearly succumbed to the cold on an isolated stretch of Idaho State Highway. But I don't retain clear memories of the most severe moments, at least not in a direct sense. What remains vivid is the distinct smell of my mother's thick coat, the sharp, stinging sensation of snowflakes striking my face whenever the van door briefly opened, and my father quietly swearing under his breath in a manner he never used when he thought children might be listening. But that experience wasn't merely a story I carried. It was a narrative that fundamentally carried me forward. My mother recounted it frequently throughout my childhood at Thanksgiving gatherings, during Christmas. Anytime a relative complained about the severity of winter, that the narrative fragments I don't personally remember transformed into memories nonetheless. They thoroughly sank into my consciousness. And every single time she recounted the tale, she would conclude with the exact same observation, staring directly at me as if she still could not grasp any aspect of the event. "I still don't know how you knew his name." Michael. That evening has been persistently lodged in my mind for years and years, and now I am sufficiently mature to tell it myself, infused with a distinct feeling I did not comprehend back in my childhood, the distinct feeling that something else was present on that dark highway with us, something silently watching, something possessing knowledge. My mother, Lynn, was 29 years old back then. My stepfather, whom we called Calder, was a big, reserved man who specialized in construction work and firmly believed that strong duct tape could resolve almost anything except marital conflicts. We resided in a small, rented house in Nampa, Idaho, a place where the wind always seemed to be carrying fine dirt particles, and every winter arrived much sooner than the official weatherman had promised. We were originally scheduled to depart a day earlier to visit my distant grandfather near Salmon, Idaho, a long, challenging drive north across twisting mountain roads that remained frozen even when the sun was shining. But my stepfather became stuck working late at his job, and my mother absolutely refused to drive those treacherous roads without his presence. Consequently, the trip was postponed until the following morning. The forecast projected light snow, a blatant lie. By the time we successfully passed through Chalice, the sky appeared bruised and deeply angry. By the time we actually reached the mountain pass, the wind was slicing violently through the old van's seams. And by the time the snow accumulation started to stick to the road, Calder spoke the exact words that caused my mother's jaw to sharply clench. "We'll manage just fine. It's only a few flurries." My mom quickly turned around in her seat and offered me and my older brother Lane the first of many forced, fake smiles of the evening. "Are you boys warm enough tucked in? Blankets secure?" I nodded my head vigorously. Lane shrugged his shoulders. He was 9 years old and constantly pretending to possess more toughness than me. Outside, the escalating storm rapidly consumed the road. Inside, the aging van began emitting mechanical distress. And from that critical point onward, the account ceases being merely a family trip and transforms into something else entirely. Around 5:40 in the evening, when the sun completely dipped behind the mountain ridge line and everything was instantly cast in shades of deep blue and absolute black, the van's engine produced a horrifying sound like someone forcefully grinding metal parts inside a high-speed blender. "Shit," Calder muttered under his breath. The engine sputtered, wheezed heavily, and then gave one final, rattling cough before completely dying. The steering wheel suddenly pulled hard, and even as a young child, I instinctively felt the van drifting sideways, violently skidding on a patch of ice. My mom screamed loudly, "Calder, watch the sheer edge." He violently fought the wheel just sufficiently to prevent us from sliding uncontrollably toward the cliffside drop. The van eventually rolled to a stop onto the incredibly thin shoulder area of the road and violently shuddered to a halt, the intense wind rocking it forcefully, as if the storm itself harbored impatience. When everything suddenly went silent, Lane whispered, "Are we going to die here?" My mom quickly snapped back, "No, absolutely no one is dying. Everyone must remain calm." But adults often lie when they feel the urgent need to. Calder attempted the ignition sequence once more. Click. Nothing happened. He waited a brief moment. Tried the key again. Click. Click. Still nothing. "This is bad situation," he whispered softly, but not quietly enough for us not to hear. Mom desperately grabbed her mobile phone. One solitary bar of signal strength. A complete miracle. She immediately dialed roadside assistance. CIA, the Canadian-based service provider that Idaho drivers could still contact. a peculiar consequence of the border state mutual agreements. The closest available assistance was over a full hour away from our position. When she finally ended the call, her voice was trembling thinly. They said they'll send whoever is available. But the dispatcher specifically said the storm is much worse up here than they initially calculated. She couldn't promise how rapidly anyone could possibly reach our location. Calder looked out into the absolute blackness of the swirling snow. No one's going to be traveling on this road tonight, I know it. He was undoubtedly correct. Mom meticulously bundled us up, wrapping me securely inside her coat like a protective second skin. The temperature plunged so rapidly my expelled breath felt physically sharp. Lane complained that his small fingers hurt severely. Mom kissed his forehead tenderly and whispered, "I know, baby. I know how much it hurts." Then she firmly pressed her face into my hair, and although she actively tried to conceal the emotion, I clearly felt her body violently shiver. I didn't fully comprehend fear yet, not in the way adults experience it, but I distinctly remember thinking the profound darkness outside felt excessively large, excessively empty, excessively silent, as if it were passively waiting for our demise. This is the precise point where the memory shifts from being blurred to becoming sharply focused. The moment that continues to defy all rational explanation for my parents, regardless of how many times they retell the event. My mom was tightly holding me, gently rocking back and forth slightly, her breathing ragged and shaking. She whispered intensely to Calder, "What if nobody manages to find us? What if they literally can't cut through all this snow?" Her voice completely cracked on the last word. Snow aggressively beat against the metal exterior of the van. The wind howled like a ferocious, living entity. And then I, little 6-year-old me, lifted my face out of the confines of her coat and stated clearly, "Don't you worry, Mom. Michael's definitely coming." My mother instantly froze. Calder looked back sharply toward me. "What exactly did he just say?" "He said, Michael's coming." Mom attempted to form a smile, but her eyes were filled with confusion. "You mean the Archangel, Guardian Angel Michael?" she asked softly. I shook my head decisively. "No, the man in the big tow truck." For 2 agonizing hours, absolutely nothing passed our vehicle, not a single other car, not one sound except the relentless storm aggressively beating at the metal shell. We completely ran out of power for the emergency hazard lights. The van became so intensely cold that Lane started to cry uncontrollably, and Calder, a man who had never shed a tear in his adult life, quickly wiped his nose on his sleeve like he desperately didn't want us to see his distress. Mom continued humming a tune to me. Her voice was almost completely gone. Then, a sudden glow pierced through the thick storm. My mom jerked abruptly upright. "What in the world is that?" A pair of brilliant headlights sharply cut through the overwhelming darkness, like 2 large coins burning in intense white in a vast sea of blackness. The low, deep hum of an engine grew louder and louder until a massive tow truck slowly crawled around the nearby bend in the road, its heavy snow chains loudly cracking against the pervasive ice. Calder frantically scrambled outside, momentarily slipping on the frozen ground surface. "Hey, over here!" he yelled loudly into the howling wind. The immense truck pulled to a stop directly beside the van, its powerful brake lights turning the accumulated snow a blood-red color. The driver dramatically swung his door open and stepped out, a tall, heavily built man in a thick winter coat, snow thickly crusted onto his hood, a powerful flashlight gripped firmly in his gloved hand. He walked up, leaned into the relentless storm and shouted, "Evening, folks. I'm with CIA, name's Michael. Are you the family that urgently called in the breakdown?" My mom gasped so violently, she actually dropped her glove. Calder stopped dead mid-step in the snow. I just blinked calmly and whispered, "I told you so." The driver, Michael, did not seem to notice their profound shock. He was too intensely occupied tossing heavy chains out and diligently checking the tow hook connection. "Storm's turning incredibly ugly," he informed them. "You're damn lucky I managed to successfully make it through that last ridge section. Roads are iced over to hell. But don't worry, I will definitely get you out of this." He offered a brief smile, and even through the biting cold, The expression felt surprisingly warm. But here is the crucial part my parents always recall with crystal clarity. He turned toward me specifically and looked momentarily startled, as if he somehow recognized my face, like he had somehow expected my presence. But he did not say anything at all. Not yet, at least. Michael worked with intense speed, far too fast for the severity of the storm conditions. Like he had successfully performed this exact precise tow operation 100 times on this exact winding road. When he helped my mom carry me inside the warm truck cab, he remarked, "Little guy looks half frozen solid. Let's get him warmed up properly." But something critical about the way he casually said "little guy" caused Mom to instantly stiffen, as if he had somehow known exactly who I was before she ever uttered my name. Lane whispered urgently, "Mom, I don't like this man." Mom replied, "He is here strictly to help us, sweetheart." But her voice possessed that noticeable trembling quality she only used when she was actively lying. Calder climbed into the backseat of the tow truck and immediately asked, "How did you even manage to get through all that weather?" The dispatcher claimed the roads might completely close down. Michael tightened his jaw a slight amount. Had to do it. Someone genuinely needed my help. He firmly started the powerful engine, and I always go where I'm needed. Mom and Calder exchanged a deeply troubled look. I just quietly stared at Michael because I vividly remembered something entirely new, something small and simple, something I had kept strictly to myself until that moment. When I informed my mother earlier that Michael was coming, I wasn't actually referring to an angel. I wasn't making an accidental guess regarding his arrival. I wasn't talking about a simple dream. I was referring directly to the tall man I clearly saw standing right beside the van in the heart of the storm earlier. A man no one else could see. A man I saw only for a second before he mysteriously disappeared into the dense snow. Same heavy jacket, same distinct voice, same facial features. Halfway down the mountain descent, the tow truck swerved slightly as Michael glanced directly at me in the rearview mirror. "Kid," he said flatly, "your mom informed me about what you mentioned back there." I did not offer a reply. He offered a slight smile, but it was not a happy, warm smile. "How did you know my name before I even arrived at your location?" Mom quickly squeezed my hand tightly. "Rick, honey, you really don't have to answer him." But Michael interrupted her immediately. No, I genuinely want to hear the reason from him." His voice dropped dangerously lower. "Go on, kid. Tell me the truth." The tow truck cab felt too warm now, too confined, too utterly silent. "I saw you," I whispered back. Michael quickly blinked. "Saw me? When?" "Before the truck physically came." Mom and Calder completely froze in their seats. Michael stared straight ahead intently. The wipers thumped slowly. Snow aggressively smeared across the entire windshield like thick, white blood. Then he spoke extremely softly. "Kid, I wasn't here before that." A profound cold sensation crept intensely into my stomach, because I knew I was absolutely not lying. I had seen him standing right beside the dead van, intensely staring through the small window, directly at me like he was patiently waiting. We reached a small designated pull-off area halfway down the mountain, a place where the storm conditions usually cleared up. Except tonight, it definitively did not. The wind screamed even harder and louder. Michael deliberately slowed the truck. "We're stopping right here," he announced. Calder frowned deeply. "Why? We're not even close to the nearest town." Michael did not offer an immediate answer. Then he said simply, "Because something is wrong." He turned his head just slightly, looking directly at me again, and something in his expression dramatically changed from normal concern to genuine fear. "Kid," he muttered, "you were not supposed to know my name." My mom's voice went sharp with raw panic. "What in the hell does that mean, Michael?" Suddenly, every single light on the dashboard violently flickered. The engine sputtered hard. It died instantly. The tow truck went pitch dark. The storm outside brutally pressed against the glass like an aggressive, living thing. Michael whispered almost inaudibly to himself, "Not again." My mom grabbed Calder's arm with tremendous force. "What in the hell is happening now?" Before he could answer, the headlights suddenly flashed back on for just one terrifying second, and in that instantaneous second, I clearly saw the same identical figure, standing right in the road ahead. Same exact height, same heavy jacket, same distinct boots. The exact same facial features as Michael. My breath hitched in my throat. "Mom," I whispered. "There are two of them." "No, baby," she said, shaking uncontrollably. "You're just frightened." But Calder clearly saw it too. Jesus, who in the hell is that standing there? Michael did not look even remotely surprised, not even slightly shocked. Instead, he whispered, "Not again. Not again." He abruptly opened his truck door. Mom screamed loudly. "What in the world are you doing?" Michael did not turn around to face her. "He followed me here," he explained. "Then he always follows me." He stepped out quickly into the raging storm. The figure outside immediately stepped closer, and the door slammed shut with a finality. Through the fogged-up windshield, all we could visually perceive were dark silhouettes. Michael and the other man circling each other slowly in the blizzard's core, their voices barely carried through the wind's roar. "You were explicitly supposed to leave that night," the other man clearly stated. Michael shouted back loudly, "I simply did what I morally could." "You saved them," the man replied with chilling certainty. "You were not supposed to save them." My mom gasped sharply. Calder inhaled sharply and loudly. Lane started crying hysterically. I stared, frozen rigid. The two silhouettes violently collided. A brief struggle ensued, a sharp yell, a sudden flash of something brilliantly bright like white fire. Then immediate silence. The storm completely swallowed everything visual and auditory. Michael never returned to the truck. Neither did the other man disappear. 40 minutes later, though it felt like endless hours, another tow truck finally arrived. A completely different driver, a different voice, a different company logo patch. He quickly radioed for emergency services to assist us. He wrapped us securely in thermal blankets. He inquired if we'd seen any other tow trucks on the winding road. My mom insisted. Yes, a man named Michael. He physically saved us, but he walked out into the storm. The driver frowned deeply. "I am the only operational tow truck on duty tonight, ma'am," he informed her. "And no one named Michael works for our company." Mom argued vehemently with him. Calder firmly insisted the driver was wrong. They meticulously described the truck, the jacket, the chains, every minute detail. The driver just slowly shook his head. "Ma'am, there hasn't been a permanent driver named Michael operating in this region since 2008. Mom blinked hard. What exactly happened to him? The driver hesitated for a moment. He passed away on this very mountain road. A severe snowstorm hit. He tried desperately to rescue a stranded family, but he didn't manage to make it back to safety." He paused meaningfully. "People still claim he often shows up when someone urgently needs him the most." My mom went absolutely pale. Calder stopped breathing completely for a second. I just whispered softly, "I told you he was coming all along." I'm an adult now, old enough to look back at the event and fully understand something I didn't grasp at 6 years old. I didn't simply predict Michael's arrival. I didn't guess his specific name. I saw him clearly. I saw him standing right beside the van before his physical truck ever arrived. I saw something that was fundamentally not alive anymore. Something endlessly replaying crucial moments it never managed to finish. And sometimes, on frigid nights, when the snow impacts the window glass just perfectly, I swear I can faintly hear that tow truck engine noise again. Not loud, not extremely close, just enough to know he is still persevering out there, still driving that dangerous mountain road, still actively saving people he was explicitly never supposed to save in the first place, still constantly trying to successfully fix the one night he never managed to fully finish. And maybe still following me because I witnessed him when I wasn't supposed to. And he knew it completely. He looked directly at me like he clearly remembered me. Like he was patiently waiting for me to fully mature enough to finally comprehend the truth of what I saw. Maybe someday I will achieve that understanding. For now, all I know for certain is this. I was 6 years old the night a dead man saved my entire family. And I will never forget his name. Michael. I had reached the age of 27 the day I finally acknowledged to myself that something sinister from my childhood had persistently continued tracking me. People often discuss memories from childhood as if they are soft, hazy things, blurry, semi-forgotten, gently softened by the mere passage of time. But some memories refuse to fade. Some reside deeply within you like a sharp splinter that was never successfully extracted. And every single time you inhale a certain way, you feel that acute sting all over again. My splinter originated from the winter. I was precisely 7 years old, residing up in a tiny rural town located in northern Vermont, a remote place christened Coldwater Hollow, securely tucked in near the towering Green Mountains. At that point in time, we occupied a creaky, 2-story wooden house my father personally constructed himself. We possessed 3 acres of wild land bordered by thick, dense pine trees. And immediately behind that, stretched another expanse of forest nobody truly monitored or managed. Local folks there consistently cautioned, never venture past the old maple stand. That's the threshold where the woods ceased being harmless. I was far too young then to truly understand the full weight of their warning. Back then, my personal world consisted of simple routines: school, snow, cartoons, and my mother's voice yelling that I needed to put on much thicker socks. Dad worked late nights plowing the county road system. Mom worked morning shifts at a small general store located off Route 91. Most weekdays I returned home to an unoccupied house until she finished her shift. My older brother Lyle was 13, then tall, loud, excessively sarcastic, always behaving as if he were 20. He had this habitual way of rolling his eyes severely, like everything I attempted was the most moronic thing he'd ever witnessed. But despite all the ceaseless teasing, he was profoundly protective of me, more intensely protective than I fully comprehended until much later in life. That November morning began with customary normalcy, or at least, that was my initial assumption. The phone jarred us awake at 6:22 in the morning, one of those old, beige, wall-mounted telephones that consistently sounded like someone was screaming desperately through a tin-can cylinder. Mom quickly answered it. "Yeah. Uh-huh. Okay. Got it." She hung up the receiver and quickly blew stray hair out of her face. Schools are closed. Roads are coated in ice like polished glass. She looked visibly stressed, partially relieved, partially annoyed. Lyle aggressively pumped the air. "Hell yeah. Snow day." Mom snapped sharply. "Watch the foul language." I sat calmly at the kitchen counter eating my cereal and kicking my small legs under the chair's edge. "Can I go outside briefly later? Maybe down to the creek?" Mom firmly shook her head. "Absolutely not the creek. You remain where I can clearly see you. The snow depth is significant, and the surrounding woods aren't plowed." Dad was not yet home. He was still actively out plowing the busy interstate highway. Once Mom departed for her work shift, it was just Lyle and me. He prepared himself a grilled cheese sandwich at 10 in the morning and instructed me to cease hovering around his space. "You're like a little dog," he muttered dismissively. "Go play a game or something." I interpreted that statement as explicit permission. I carefully bundled myself up: snow bibs, heavy boots, thick gloves, scarf. I grabbed the cheap, bright plastic sled and headed directly into the backyard, which gently sloped into a small hill before meeting the dense line of trees. The ambient air was cold enough to sharply sting my lungs. Everything appeared bright, peacefully quiet, serene, painfully, utterly normal. If I had possessed any knowledge of what the subsequent 10 hours would inflict upon my life, I would have violently slammed the back door shut and remained securely inside the house. It began subtly. A sudden, deep silence. Not just the absence of loud noises, but the total elimination of all sound. No wind movement, no creaking of the frozen trees, no distant noise of snowmobiles, just a total, dead hush that felt fundamentally mismatched with the world. At 7 years old, I lacked the proper vocabulary to describe the feeling, but adults later would recognize it. The pressure dropped before something catastrophic. I vividly remember pausing abruptly halfway down the hill's slope, looking around nervously. "Lyle!" I yelled out. Nothing responded. I shrugged off the feeling and continued laboriously trudging toward the woods. Behind our own property was a small path, More accurately, a deer trail that led progressively deeper toward a tiny clearing containing a small, frozen pond. I was strictly forbidden from going there, but young children always foolishly believe they are completely invincible. I remember confidently thinking I'd be safely back in maybe 15 minutes' time. The snow depth was up past my calves, but I continued moving forward, softly humming to myself, actively dragging the plastic sled trailing behind me. That's when the immense silence forcefully struck me again, heavier, considerably thicker, as if the entire world was consciously holding its breath. I stopped abruptly near the old maple tree stand. The trees situated there were gnarled and severely blackened from a lightning strike that had occurred years prior. Local folks referred to them as the burned fingers. As a child, I initially thought that moniker sounded quite amusing, but that specific morning, they looked anything but humorous. They looked intensely watchful. Still, I took the step past them. The small pond came into clear view, flat, completely frozen, pale as bleached bone. And that's the precise moment things went deeply wrong. At first, nothing visibly happened. Then the fine hair on my arm suddenly stood rigidly up under my heavy jacket. Day crawling. Intense prickling sensation originated at the base of my neck and swiftly traveled all the way down the length of my spine. I had never experienced fear like that before in my entire life. Not fear of something tangible and real. Fear of something profoundly unseen. I whispered softly, "Hello." Why do kids always perform that unnecessary action? Why did I instinctively do that? And the vast forest simply replied with profound silence. Then a distinct crunch, the sound of snow directly behind me. I spun around so rapidly I instantly slipped and fell backward onto the solid ice surface. That my breath fogged the air in frantic, short bursts. Lyle. But Lyle was nowhere nearby. Something else was present. It stood motionless, just beyond the line of trees. Far enough away that I could not discern specific details, but close enough that my primitive brain violently screamed a single command: run. A tall, massive shape, excessively tall, wrongly tall, gauntly thin, completely unmoving, like a dark shadow someone had crudely cut from paper and firmly propped upright. I blinked, and it suddenly shifted, like it instantly jumped closer, without making any visible movement. My chest physically collapsed in on itself. I frantically scrambled back to my feet, instantly abandoning the plastic sled. I do not recall breathing at all. I just remember the desperate sensation of running. Tree branches sharply slapped my face. Snow rapidly filled my boots. My lungs burned with intense pain. I did not dare look back at the figure. I instinctively knew that if I looked back, I would completely fall apart. The immense silence aggressively followed me all the way back home. When I stumbled blindly into the backyard area, the sky had turned a deep orange hue. Not the morning orange I knew. Sunset orange. That's the instant I froze. Mom violently burst out the back door, face utterly panicked. "Where were you, young man?" she screamed hysterically. "Do you have any idea, dear God?" I instantly called the neighbors. I called the sheriff. I stared blankly at her, like she was speaking a completely foreign language. I just left. I was only gone a brief little while." "You left at 10 o'clock. She choked out the words, firmly grabbing me by my shoulders. 10 hours. 10 whole hours. That felt like only 20 minutes had passed. I tried desperately to explain. She struggled intensely to comprehend, but neither of us could reconcile the facts. What terrified her most wasn't simply that I had vanished. It was that I had no frostbite, no visible exhaustion, no signs of dehydration, no indication whatsoever I'd been exposed to the intense elements for an entire day's duration, as if I truly had only been absent for 20 minutes. Dad finally came home much later, pacing furiously, and utterly terrified all simultaneously. "What in the hell were you actually doing out there, son?" "I wasn't. I don't know." "Son, don't you dare lie to me." But I wasn't lying at all. For many years, that singular day lived in my mind like a dark shadow held underwater, vividly visible but profoundly distorted. I completely stopped going into the dense woods. I slept with my bedroom light on continuously until I was 11 years old. Anytime the entire world outside went unnaturally, deeply quiet, I felt violently sick, but I could never properly explain the reason why. I didn't know what entity had effectively stolen those 10 precious hours. I didn't know whether I saw a wild creature, an insane person, or something fundamentally other entirely. I only knew that whatever malevolent thing I saw had noticed my presence, and it never, ever forgot me. Fast forward to the present moment, 27 years old, currently residing in Chicago, working professionally as a car mechanic. You would logically assume the immense city noise would effectively drown out all memories of remote forests and profound silence. But psychological trauma does not operate according to logic. One particular night last December, during a furious blizzard that completely shut down half the massive city, I finished work and left at 9 in the evening. The wide streets were completely empty, snow swirling rapidly sideways, visibility barely exceeding 40 feet. I trudged heavily toward my apartment building located 3 blocks away. Head down, hood tightly up, and then a sudden, unearthly silence. Not city noise silence. Not the soft sound of snow falling. That precise, chilling silence. My breath hitched suddenly. No, I whispered urgently. No, no, no. The air felt incredibly heavy. Familiar. That same awful crawling sensation at the base of my neck instantly spread, like painfully freezing water. I abruptly turned around. Something stood within the snow haze farther down the block. A tall, dark silhouette. Too tall. Too perfectly straight. Too unnervingly still. My chest tightened severely. The blizzard howled loudly all around me, but somehow I distinctly heard footsteps crunching in the snow behind my position. Soft, slow. Utterly deliberate, just like that terrifying sound from before. Not again, I whispered, stumbling backward awkwardly. The street light situated directly above me flickered violently. Then it instantly went dark. I ran blindly. I didn't consciously think, didn't look backward. I sprinted frantically up the stairs of my apartment building, violently slammed the metal door shut, securely locked it, deadbolted, and pressed my back firmly against the wooden surface. My heart hammered forcefully, as if it would physically break my ribs. In the thick silence of the hallway, something tapped once softly against the opposite side of my closed door. Just a single, solitary knock, almost sounding curious. Then absolute nothingness. I didn't sleep a moment that night. I didn't sleep the next night, either. By the 3rd consecutive night, I mentally cracked. I immediately booked a flight back to Vermont, back toward Coldwater Hollow. For the first time in 19 years. If something malevolent had actually followed me, I needed definitive answers. Mom had relocated years ago, but Lyle still lived up there, working professionally as a logger. He collected me from the airport in his beat-up Ford pickup. You look like you've been through hell, he commented bluntly. I feel like it, I admitted. Why are you suddenly here? I urgently needed to see the woods again. He shot me a sharp, penetrating look. You're not obsessing about that day again, are you? I offered no response. His grip instinctively tightened on the steering wheel. You were gone 10 whole hours, man. 10. I thoroughly searched that whole damn forest for you. Mom was completely losing her mind. I know, I replied. I still experience nightmares about that day. That particular confession surprised me deeply. Lyle almost never discussed personal feelings. What kind of nightmares? He briefly hesitated. I heard you desperately calling my name, he said quietly. But you were definitively not there. I kept hearing your voice yelling my name, but every single time I followed the sound, I ended up moving deeper into the woods. I don't discuss it because nobody ever believes me. A fresh wave of deep, icy chill rippled through my entire body. Lyle, I stated, my voice audibly shaking. I saw something that specific day. He remained utterly silent. I don't know what it actually was, but I firmly believe it found me again. In Chicago. He instantly went pale. Then why did you abruptly come back here? That thing, if it's truly real, you just lured it straight back home. I think it was already making its way back anyway. We eventually reached the location of the old house around dusk. Nobody resided there anymore. It was partially rotted. The front porch was visibly sagging. The windows were filthy. Snow covered everything in a thick, pristine, untouched sheet. Lyle killed the engine. Are you absolutely sure you still want to go inside? He asked, genuinely concerned. No, but I feel I have to. Inside, the deserted house smelled intensely of dust and cold, damp wood. My heavy boots audibly creaked on the dusty floorboards. My breath visibly fogged the stale air. Everything was exactly how I remembered it, yet subtly wrong. Smaller, considerably darker, as if time had internally decided the house wasn't structurally worth holding together anymore. Lyle stood watchfully behind me, one hand positioned near the hunting knife, clipped onto his belt. Let's just finish this quickly. We stepped out the back door, and the entire world instantly went silent. Immediately, my stomach plummeted violently. Lyle whispered, "Not this silence again." The woods beyond the yard felt even darker than the approaching night, profoundly heavy, watchful. Then crunch, the sound of snow directly behind us. We slowly turned around. A figure stood motionless at the edge of the tree line. Tall, thin, wrong in every conceivable way. Not a shadow this time. Something much more substantial. Its limbs appeared excessively long. Its upright posture was unnaturally too straight. Its face. God! Its face was utterly impossible. Like the mere idea of a face, but devoid of any recognizable details. Features were blurred, visibly floating, continuously shifting. My mouth went completely dry. Lyle firmly grabbed my arm. "Don't you dare run. That's exactly what it is trying to provoke." "What exactly is it?" I asked. "I don't know," he whispered urgently. "But it tried to use your voice back then." "Tried to use my voice?" The creature stepped forward slightly, not walking, but unnervingly sliding, as if physical reality didn't have the appropriate constraints for its movement. My vision temporarily blurred. My ears rang loudly. My mind felt distinctly like it was being forcibly pulled sideways. Lyle gripped me even harder. "Stay focused with me. Stay here." But I clearly heard something else. A voice, my exact own voice, coming distinctly from the creature's form. "Come back," it whispered perfectly, expertly mimicking my 7-year-old self. "Come play by the pond." A severe wave of nausea violently hit me. My knees buckled beneath me. "No," I gasped desperately. "No, no." The creature tilted its strange head, intensely studying me like a detached scientist meticulously studying an insect specimen. And then, time physically bent, not stopped completely, but twisted. The surrounding trees visibly warped. The sky intensely flickered between dusk, night, morning, and dusk again. The snow appeared to fall upward into the sky. The solid ground felt unnervingly like flowing water. For a brief, terrifying split second, I clearly saw the pond, frozen and pale. Even though we were physically nowhere near its location, my childhood boots seemed to sink momentarily into the ice. My adult boots stood firmly in the fresh snow. Both realities profoundly overlapped. I screamed loudly. Lyle screamed my full name and violently yanked me backward, so hard I immediately crashed onto the frozen ground. The entire world sharply snapped back into its proper place, like a taut rubber band violently breaking. The creature merely twitched just once, and the entire vast forest groaned deeply like a gigantic, dying animal. Then it instantly vanished, gone completely like someone had purposefully deleted it from the world's existence. The immense silence suddenly lifted. Normal sound finally returned. My heartbeat loudly thundered in my ears, the only familiar thing securely anchoring me to my body. Lyle dropped down beside me, breathing heavily and raggedly. "Are you okay?" "No," I whispered. "I don't think I've ever truly been okay since that day." We did not remain inside the woods. We did not linger at the old house. We did not exchange any words during the drive back to town before I boarded the return flight back to Chicago the next morning. Lyle firmly grabbed my shoulder before I departed. "That thing is not finished with you, Ray," he stated grimly. "But listen carefully. Whatever unfolds next, do not ever go off alone. Don't allow it to successfully pull you somewhere it ultimately controls." "Where does it gain control?" I urgently asked. His face was utterly grim. "Anywhere the world suddenly goes profoundly quiet." It's been 3 weeks since that frightening encounter. Chicago has not experienced genuine silence since the 1800s. Sirens blare, car horns honk relentlessly, trains rumble, people yell from open windows. This massive city is the very noise incarnate. But last night, around 2 in the morning, while simply brushing my teeth, the entire building went utterly still. Dead still. No gentle humming of appliances, no passing cars outside, no plumbing noises, no sound from neighbors, just profound silence. And in that sudden silence, I clearly heard a small child's voice whisper directly behind me, my exact own voice. "Come back." I dropped the toothbrush instantly. I didn't turn my body around because I instinctively knew that if I looked into the mirror's surface, I wouldn't see my own reflection looking back. I'd see the frozen pond patiently waiting for me. I don't know what happens next in this story, but I know the woods were definitively not the beginning of this, and they certainly aren't the end. Whatever malevolent entity it is, it wants something specific, and it possesses all the time in the entire world to take it. I was 13 the first time I was granted permission to spend a full winter weekend completely alone in our extended family's mountain cabin. It was a small, rustic place securely tucked between seemingly endless stretches of dense pine forest and long, heavily winding country roads that barely saw any use except during the brief hunting season. My parents had purchased the cabin years earlier. Nothing luxurious or fancy, just 2 small bedrooms, a functional stone fireplace, and a front porch that emitted a loud creaking sound whenever the wind hit it just right. Back then, the mere concept of being completely alone felt like the single coolest thing imaginable. No yelling, no assigned chores, no tedious lectures about my steadily slipping math grade. Just me, the accumulating snow, and whatever highly questionable content I felt like watching on Netflix. But before I recount the events of the night that fundamentally altered how I perceived snowstorms forever, there's a crucial detail you must know. I used to genuinely love severe storms. I don't fully understand why most children instantly got scared when thunder violently shook the window panes or heavy snow piled up high enough to effectively bury half of the driveway. But for me, it felt profoundly peaceful, safe, like the entire noisy world got momentarily quieter and noticeably smaller for a limited time. When I was a small child, my mother would meticulously wrap me up in 2 heavy blankets, prepare me hot cocoa, and we would watch the persistent snow fall from the large living room window. I had always perceived storms as deeply comforting, even outright magical. I no longer hold that belief. My parents were actively celebrating their wedding anniversary that particular Saturday and had meticulously planned to remain out late. Dinner at a restaurant 2 towns away, perhaps a movie screening, maybe even a nightcap cocktail. They departed around 5 in the evening, just as the sky began to turn a flat, dull white, and the wind kicked up small, frantic tornadoes of snow dust on the driveway surface. My mom stated firmly, "If the weather turns really bad, call us immediately, okay?" And my dad added the standard caution, "Do not open that door unless you clearly hear us call your name. People often get unsettlingly weird during intense storms." He always uttered things like that, but I barely registered his words. I was 13 and utterly convinced bad things only happened within the confines of movies. They hadn't even been gone 10 minutes before the first heavy flakes started falling sideways. The cabin windows rattled violently like loose, chattering teeth. I instantly knew what that sound signaled. Roads were soon going to turn into a severe nightmare, but I felt perfectly fine. I had the entire place completely to myself. I quickly kicked off my shoes, carelessly tossed my jacket onto the couch, cracked open a cold root beer, and went straight to the Netflix interface. I deliberately selected some cheesy, low-budget horror flick, partially because I thought watching it made me appear braver than I actually felt, partially because I figured watching scary content alone would somehow definitively prove something to myself. Approximately 20 minutes into the film, I grew hungry. I quickly checked the fridge, completely empty except for numerous ketchup packets and leftover chili I had previously sworn I'd never consume again. So, I decided to order a pizza delivery. The woman on the phone sounded incredibly exhausted. "Just so you are fully aware," she informed me, "our driver is running extremely slow today. That storm is actively coming in very heavy." "No worries at all," I replied quickly, acting far more laid back than I genuinely felt. She managed a weary laugh. Lucky kid. Sit tight and wait. I hung up, returned to my paused movie, and tried my best not to imagine the driver skidding violently into a deep ditch somewhere remote. Outside, the wind howled aggressively like it harbored intense anger at the entire world. The storm escalated from bad to worse with alarming speed. Snow wasn't just falling softly. It was violently slamming sideways, like someone had forcefully turned on a gigantic industrial fan directly above the cabin. The interior lights flickered twice rapidly, making my heart abruptly drop each time it happened. Once before, the power had completely failed up there, and we endured zero heat for many hours. I absolutely did not want to repeat that frightening experience. I checked the time. 9:47 in the evening. The pizza should have logically arrived by now. I was halfway through mentally convincing myself they must have simply canceled the order when bing, bong. The sharp, high-pitched sound sliced right through the cabin, way louder and much sharper than our familiar city doorbell back at home. I instinctively jumped, nearly spilling my cold drink. I paused the movie, placed the remote control down gently, and cautiously walked toward the front door. I vividly remember my hand briefly shaking a little, but I rationalized that it was merely the cold air seeping in. I slowly pulled the door open, and the intense cold slammed violently into me like a speeding truck. But that wasn't the truly shocking thing. It was him. A man stood directly on the porch, wearing what looked distinctly like a pizza delivery uniform, but from no company I visually recognized. The shirt was a dark, dull red, stretched far too tightly across his broad chest, and clearly missing two crucial buttons near the collar. His laminated name tag was severely scratched up. The letters appeared unevenly carved, like someone had crudely made it with a small pocket knife. It plainly read Rick. He looked profoundly wrong. His hair was excessively long for typical food service work, long enough to curl thickly over his shoulders. His face was smeared with dirt or perhaps thick grease. I couldn't accurately tell which. And the smile he offered me, it was not a natural, normal smile. It was rigid, stretched impossibly too wide, as if he were deliberately trying to copy what a smile should look like, but didn't quite possess the capacity to execute it correctly. He held out a cardboard pizza box. "You ordered this?" he asked, his voice light and strangely, unnervingly cheerful, like he had practiced sounding artificially friendly, but fundamentally failed to get the tone right. I hesitated, deeply unsettled. Yeah, I did order this. Thanks very much." He did not blink at all. "Cold night, isn't it?" "Yeah, it is." He maintained his unsettling stare, not directly at my face, but through it. Then he remarked slowly, "You live way out here all alone." A massive red flag instantly exploded inside my head. I spoke quickly. "My parents are definitely inside right now. They're just, upstairs resting." He still didn't blink once. I instinctively reached into my pocket and instantly realized my wallet wasn't present. "Hold on just a second," I said quickly. "I'll grab the necessary cash from the kitchen." His disturbing smile twitched wider still. "I'll just wait right here." I closed the door almost all the way, deliberately leaving just a tiny sliver of a crack so I could continue observing him. He didn't move an inch, just stood there rigidly, unnervingly smiling. I walked quickly into the kitchen, grabbed my wallet from the counter, and clearly heard the small television set in the corner, playing softly. We always kept it tuned to the local news channel for essential weather updates. I wasn't initially paying much attention until I distinctly heard the anchor say, "Local authorities have now confirmed the identity of the deceased man found earlier today in a roadside ditch near the Pine Ridge area." I froze instantly. The anchor continued. "The victim, Rick Halper, a pizza delivery driver for Mountain Slice, was last seen by colleagues leaving the restaurant around 6 o'clock this evening." My gaze snapped toward the TV screen. Police investigators believe he was tragically robbed, violently assaulted, and left in the heavy snow without his company uniform. If you live in the Pine Ridge area, please exercise extreme caution and do not open your door to any unfamiliar delivery drivers. The suspect may be actively impersonating a driver. My stomach dropped violently to the floor. His name tag, his profoundly weird uniform, his utterly disturbing smile. The man standing just outside my door explicitly called himself Rick. The man on the television was confirmed dead. My brain violently short-circuited. I suddenly ran, but when I frantically reached the entryway, the heavy door was hanging wide open. The porch was completely empty, and the cardboard pizza box lay abandoned on the floor, face down, rapidly melting snow accumulating around it. My heart pounded so hard inside my chest, I genuinely thought I would pass out from the pressure. My first instinct was to urgently call the police. My second immediate instinct was to frantically run outside and sprint for the nearest house, which was nearly a mile away through thick, unforgiving woods and dangerously waist-high snow. My third instinct was to hide immediately, but I didn't manage to act on any of those impulses right away. I desperately reached for my phone, and my pocket was empty. Then the realization hit me. I had left it upstairs on the nightstand, right next to the old closet. That closet I irrationally hated. I swallowed hard, forcefully grabbed the largest kitchen knife we owned, and stealthily crept toward the main staircase. Every single step felt exactly like walking through thick quicksand. My legs shook so severely I could barely lift them upward. Halfway up the stairs, the cabin loudly creaked. Not a familiar, normal creak, but a heavy, distinct one, like someone actively shifting their entire weight on an old, stressed floorboard. I completely stopped breathing, but I forced myself to keep moving upward. When I reached the top landing, the hallway felt intensely colder, like someone had recently opened a window or left a door ajar nearby. My bedroom door was hanging wide open. I hugged the cold wall tightly and leaned my head just enough to peek inside. Nothing immediately visible. Just my unmade bed, my backpack abandoned on the floor, a hoodie hanging limply off the back of the chair, and my phone visible on the nightstand, 2 feet from the closet. The closet door was visibly ajar slightly. It was always kept firmly shut before this. My pulse hammered violently through my ears. I gripped the kitchen knife tighter, my hands slick with fear-induced sweat. I whispered urgently to myself, "Just grab the phone. Grab the phone and run immediately." I slid one foot cautiously into the room, then the other. I reached out toward the phone, just inches away. The closet door suddenly shifted. Not much movement, just half an inch, but enough for me to clearly see. Eyes intensely staring directly at me. Wide, completely unblinking, and smiling. A sickening smile so unnaturally big it looked physically painful. I screamed aloud, primal scream. He violently burst out of the closet, with the horrifying sound I will never forget. Half a laugh, half a desperate gasp, like he was profoundly excited by the moment. I bolted instantly through the door, almost tripping over my own feet. Behind me, he was relentlessly running after me, his bare footsteps loudly slapping against the bare wooden floorboards. I skidded toward the stairs, gripping the railing with such force I felt sharp splinters. I did not look back until I safely reached the bottom. He was right behind me, his eyes wide, his smile stretched impossibly wide, still not blinking. I sprinted desperately to the nearest room, the downstairs bathroom, and slammed the heavy door shut so forcefully the frame visibly shook. I locked it, shoved my full body weight against the door, the knife trembling uncontrollably in my hand. He violently hit the door immediately, not with his fists, but with his shoulder. Each impact made the wooden frame groan and crack, and each time he hit it, he emitted a strange laugh. It didn't match his menacing appearance at all. It was high-pitched, incredibly childish, almost playful. "Let me in," he sang softly in a strange, almost teasing voice. "Come on, kid. I just want to talk to you." I didn't offer a reply. I physically couldn't speak. The impacts got stronger, much harder. The door groaned loudly. I frantically scanned the small bathroom. Tiny sink, plastic shower curtain, toilet mirror. No effective hiding places. Only one possible way out. The narrow, frosted window located above the toilet. I scrambled up onto the seat, pushed the small window open, and it miraculously unlatched. Snow blasted violently inside, painfully stinging my exposed face. I wiggled halfway through the narrow opening. Cracked. The door frame visibly split entirely. I desperately threw myself out the window, landing hard in a deep pile of snow that swallowed me nearly up to my chest. My hands went instantly numb. My labored breath fogged intensely in front of me. I scrambled upright, slipping, momentarily falling again, finally forcing myself into a standing position. Inside the cabin, I heard one last, heavy impact. Thud. Crack. Absolute silence, then the rapid sound of footsteps heading straight toward the front door. He was definitely coming outside for me. The storm outside was completely brutal. The wind howled so loudly it drowned out almost everything else. I staggered blindly to the side of the cabin structure, unable to run more than a few quick steps without completely losing my balance. That's when I heard him, but not the sound of footsteps, laughter. That same childish, unsettlingly too high laugh. I turned quickly left. Nothing. I turned right. His face suddenly appeared slowly around the corner of the cabin. Just his face subtly peeking out. Smiling. I screamed loudly. He stepped fully into view, still wearing that too-tight uniform, snow thickly sticking to his long hair and shoulders. He wasn't running this time. He was unnervingly tiptoeing toward me like an exaggerated, playful cartoon sneak. Knees raised high, arms bent awkwardly, head bobbing, every single step slow and intensely playful, like he was profoundly enjoying the game. I stumbled backward, slipping hard, desperately trying to force my legs to move. But the heavy snow was too deep, the relentless wind too strong. He kept relentlessly coming. 5 feet. 4. 3. Just as he got close enough that I could clearly see the thick frost forming on his eyelashes, sirens, red and blue emergency lights abruptly broke through the dense trees. He instantly froze, still wearing that unsettling smile. Then he waved at me, and sprinted full speed into the dark woods. I ran desperately toward the police car, sobbing so hard I couldn't properly breathe. 2 officers instantly jumped out, grabbing my shoulders gently, asking urgently if I was physically hurt. I couldn't form coherent words at first. Everything came out jumbled and emotionally scattered. Eventually, I managed to relate the entire story. Every single horrifying detail. They thoroughly searched the cabin, then the surrounding woods, but found nothing. No discernible footprints after a certain distance. The strong winds had completely covered everything. My parents finally got home an hour later, panicked, furious, utterly terrified. My mom held me so tightly against her body, I could barely take a breath. The police officers stayed with us until the following morning. They recovered the pizza box. They found the visibly broken bathroom door. They found fingerprints, but none of them matched anyone within their existing database. They never successfully found him. Not a single trace, not a single recorded sighting in the entire county. It's been years since that night, but severe winter storms still cause my chest to tighten painfully. Anytime someone arrives at the door with a delivery, I meticulously check their face, their uniform, their shoes, their eyes, and especially their smile. I wish I could honestly say he eventually came back, or that sometimes I hear strange knocks late at night, but I don't. Nothing ever happened again at the cabin. And somehow, that absolute silence makes the memory worse because I know he is definitively still out there somewhere, and I know he wasn't completely finished with me. He just got violently interrupted. I was 20 for the winter. I finally comprehended how meticulously some individuals actively rehearse being genuine heroes. The heavy snow had already been falling continuously for 3 days straight. The specific kind of slow, merciless storm that successfully turns a sprawling city into something significantly smaller and unnervingly quieter. Sidewalks abruptly narrowed into treacherous single-file paths. Street lights emitted a tired, yellowish glow like tired, fading suns positioned behind thick curtains of swirling white. Sirens sounded much farther away than usual, completely muffled, as if the entire city itself was silently holding its breath in anticipation. I vividly remember standing at my apartment window that specific night, my coffee gradually cooling in my hands, watching the fresh snow erase all the tire tracks below on the street. I had just recently moved to Ridgeway, a medium-sized city tucked securely against a major river in the upper Midwest region, large enough to easily vanish within, yet small enough to feel uncomfortably watched if you didn't remain consistently careful. I didn't yet know many local people. My job at a specialized medical billing office successfully paid the monthly rent, but not much else besides. Most of my evenings were typically spent scrolling endlessly on my mobile phone, persistently telling myself that this isolation was merely temporary, that something definitively better would eventually come along soon. That particular night was the one I decided to download the dating application, Tinder. I quickly assured myself it was utterly harmless. Everyone I knew did it casually, just engaging in conversations, just passively looking. I wasn't even genuinely lonely, I rationalized. At least, that's the convenient lie I constantly told myself. But the deep quiet had noticeably been getting much louder recently. Major snowstorms inherently do that to a person. They effectively trap you completely alone with your own complex thoughts. The match notifications arrived rapidly, much faster than I had initially expected. Generic compliments, playful emojis, lazy, uninspired pickup lines. Most of the profiles quickly blurred together until one specific name persistently stuck in my mind: Rowan. His profile photos were distinctly different, not highly polished, not heavily filtered to death. One featured him in a thick flannel jacket, visible snow dusting his wide shoulders, smiling genuinely like he'd just been interrupted mid-laugh. Another showed him at what looked exactly like a dark dive bar, his arms slung comfortably around someone intentionally cropped out of the frame. He was visibly tall, possessed broad, muscular shoulders, with close-cropped dark hair and striking eyes that somehow managed to look incredibly warm even through the digital screen. "You look precisely like someone who doesn't fake their laughs," his very first message read. I smiled instinctively despite my reservations. We talked that entire night about demanding bad bosses, our favorite comforting foods, and the profoundly weird, erratic things heavy snow inherently makes people do. He was quick-witted, genuinely funny, without actively trying too hard. He didn't aggressively push any boundaries, didn't immediately turn sexual. That unique quality alone felt rare enough in the online world to be genuinely worth noticing. After a few consecutive days of consistent messaging, he finally suggested meeting for drinks. "There's this fantastic, low-key place near Old Harbor," he typed. "Low-key atmosphere, cheap whiskey, absolutely no fake vibes allowed." The severe snowstorm was still actively going strong, but something about the proposed idea felt instinctively right. Public, neutral place, early evening timing. I readily agreed to the date. The bar was officially named the North Line, a long, narrow room featuring old wood-paneled walls and a massive chalkboard listing obscure beers nobody could adequately pronounce. The interior heat blast hit me the instant I walked in, immediately fogging my eyeglasses. I quickly shook the excess snow from my coat and nervously scanned the room. Rowan stood casually near the bar counter, his hands firmly in his pockets. When he caught sight of me, his face instantly lit up intensely, like we were already long-lost friends, instead of merely two total strangers, about to definitively find out whether any chemistry existed in the harsh real world. "You actually made it through the weather," he said warmly, grinning widely. "I was starting to think the storm violently kidnapped you on the way." "Almost," I joked back, feeling my nerves ease. "I fought my entire way here armed with only a shovel." He laughed easily. And just like that, my internal nerves instantly settled down completely. We quickly ordered our respective drinks and talked at length about our families. He explained he grew up 2 towns over from Ridgeway. He had moved to the city a year prior for demanding work, construction management, involving long hours, but decent, reliable pay. He asked attentive questions and actually listened carefully to my answers. When I discussed the details of my office job, he never once interrupted or seemed visibly bored. Time slipped by incredibly easily. The bar gradually filled up, then slowly thinned out. Outside, the relentless snow continued falling. Eventually, we paid the tab and stepped back out into the harsh cold. The continuing storm had thoroughly quieted the streets, leaving everything completely coated in a pristine layer of white. Rowan zipped his heavy jacket all the way up to his chin area. "Are you fine with walking the distance?" he asked concernedly. "I can definitely call you a reliable ride service." "I'm genuinely okay," I said. "It's only a few short blocks. I'll walk with you for company." I paused for a mere half a second, then nodded my full agreement. It felt incredibly normal, It felt completely safe, even. We were precisely halfway down Pierce Avenue when the incident occurred. I suddenly heard quick footsteps behind us. Too rapid, too aggressively close. Hey! I turned quickly, just as a man suddenly stepped out from the deep shadow between two adjacent buildings. He wore a thin, inadequate jacket, an old, worn baseball cap pulled down low over his eyes. His beard was noticeably patchy. His eyes appeared sharp and nervously restless. "Phones, wallets," he demanded harshly, pulling a short knife from his sleeve. Immediately, everything inside me completely froze. My body went cold instantly, in a way the mere snow couldn't logically explain. I remember ridiculously thinking stupid, pointless thoughts. This is not real. This doesn't happen in real life like this. My shaking hands simply wouldn't move. Rowan instantly stepped firmly in front of me, without the slightest hesitation. "Back off right now," he stated, his voice remarkably steady and calm. "It's seriously not worth the trouble." The mugger immediately laughed, a short, ugly, grating sound. "Move, man." The knife blade flashed violently as he lunged forward. I screamed loudly. Rowan moved incredibly fast, much faster than I could have possibly expected. He expertly dodged the swing, forcefully grabbed the assailant's arm, and drove his powerful shoulder directly into him. They both violently went down hard, their boots slipping badly on the sheer ice. The dropped knife skidded across the cold pavement surface. Rowan pinned the mugger down for a mere half a second, just long enough for his threatening message to clearly land, then violently shoved him away forcefully. "Get the hell out of here," he growled aggressively. The mugger frantically scrambled back up, his eyes wild with fear, and immediately ran away. Just like that, completely gone into the swirling storm. I stood there uncontrollably shaking, my heart pounding so loudly I truly thought the force might actually break my ribs. "Oh my God," I whispered weakly. "Oh my God, Rowan." Rowan quickly turned toward me, his breath heavily, fogging the cold air. "Hey, you are absolutely okay. You are perfectly okay now." "We need to call the police immediately," I insisted. "We absolutely need to report this." "No," he instantly said, too quickly and dismissively. "It's done now. He's completely gone." "But he had a dangerous knife. We should definitely report this to the authorities." I closely watched his face. Rowan firmly shook his head. "Trust me completely. They won't honestly do anything about it, and it'll just turn into a whole unnecessary mess." Something distinct about his tone caused me to pause abruptly. It was firm. It sounded definitive and final. I didn't like the sudden change, but I was still violently shaking, still internally processing the traumatic event. I let it go completely. He walked me the rest of the way home, stopping a secure block away from my apartment building. "Are you sure you don't want me to come up with you for a moment?" he asked casually, as if it was genuinely no big deal at all. "I'm sure, thank you," I replied. "But thank you so much. Really." He offered a small smile, but it didn't manage to quite reach his eyes this time. "Any time for you." That precise moment was the last time I ever felt safe in his presence. The strange messages aggressively started 2 days later. At first, they seemed reasonably normal. "Had fun the other night. Are you doing okay after everything that happened?" I replied politely, but maintained a safe distance. I did not feel any romantic spark whatsoever. Gratitude? Yes, immense gratitude. Attraction? Absolutely not. When he asked me out again for a second date, I told him the uncomfortable truth. "I don't think I felt a strong romantic connection, Rowan." I typed sincerely. "I truly didn't want to mislead you further." The response arrived incredibly fast. "What? You are seriously joking, right?" I patiently explained again gently and very carefully. Then his entire tone suddenly changed completely. "You're joking, right? I literally saved your life. So that's seriously it. You just selfishly use people and move on immediately." I completely stopped replying to him. The threatening messages kept persistently coming. Angrier, much meaner, filled with accusations, explicit threats, long rants sent late at 2 in the morning and early at 6 in the morning. Numerous missed calls, voicemails I deliberately refused to listen to. I promptly blocked his phone number. He managed to locate me on a different social media app, so I blocked him immediately again. For several continuous days, I jumped anxiously at every single sound originating outside my apartment, constantly checked over my shoulder nervously on the commute to work, and slept with a wooden chair aggressively wedged under my door handle for security. Then, just as suddenly as they began, it completely stopped. No more messages, no more persistent calls, absolutely nothing at all. I finally told myself the terrible ordeal was over for good. A month later, the heavy snowstorm predictably returned. I was walking home from the local grocery store when I suddenly saw him. Rowan was clearly coming directly toward me on the sidewalk, actively laughing loudly with another man beside him. My stomach violently dropped instantly. They didn't see me at all. I quickly ducked down behind a nearby building structure, my heart racing wildly, and watched them pass by safely. The man walking beside him briefly turned his head, and I instantly recognized the familiar face. Patchy, scruffy beard, old, worn baseball cap, the mugger from that night. They laughed together easily. The interaction felt comfortable, horribly familiar. The devastating truth violently hit me all at once. Cold and incredibly sharp. It had never been a random attack. Rowan hadn't genuinely saved me that night. He had meticulously staged the entire performance. I stood there uncontrollably shaking as they nonchalantly disappeared down the street, the thick snow quickly swallowing their fresh footprints behind them. I finally went home and immediately locked the door securely. Then I simply sat down on the floor and cried until my chest painfully hurt. I still constantly think about what potentially would have happened if I'd foolishly said yes to a second date. If I'd completely trusted his act. If I'd completely ignored my gut instincts. Some people don't truly desire love. They primarily want absolute control. And some dangerous storms don't genuinely show you who someone truly is until the snow finally stops falling and the truth is revealed.